There's pressing of the button. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the joint hearing of the Senate Insurance Committee and the Assembly Insurance Committee to order. I want to thank everyone for being here. I certainly want to thank Napa Valley College for hosting us. I also want to thank Senator Dodd and Assemblymember Aguiar-Curry for hosting us here in their districts and for all your help and cooperation in putting together our panels that we'll be hearing from later this morning. I certainly want to thank and welcome the chairman of the Assembly Insurance Committee, Chairman Daley, for being here, and thank you to you and your committee staff for all your good work in putting together our program today. I also want to recognize a representative from the Department of Insurance who is here. Could you raise your hand if you're from the Department of Insurance? Thank you. So if people have issues and questions, you now know who to talk to as the hearing concludes. I also want to thank the panelists who will be here today and many others who have traveled many long distances to be here and to share with us their wisdom on this important topic. We're here to look at the recovery of homeowners and communities impacted by the 2017 wildfires through the lens of their insurance. The 2017 fires resulted in almost 68,000 claims worth about $14 billion. Almost $12 billion of that have been claims by homeowners. In this area alone, the Tubbs, Nunn, and Atlas fires destroyed almost 8,000 homes. Our committee staff has been told that only one house has been completely rebuilt in Napa County. Unincorporated Sonoma County reports only 17 homes completed. The recovery process has been inconsistent, even within the same city. 30 homes have reportedly been completed in Coffey Park in Santa Rosa, but only one in Fountain Grove. We hear stories of people who are having trouble rebuilding their homes, but it isn't always clear what the obstacles are or to what extent insurance problems are slowing things down. Our goal at this hearing is to find out whether homeowners are having trouble obtaining the funds they need to rebuild and what, if anything, the state can do to help. Our first panel today will focus on the problems the people of this region have experienced with their insurance coverage since the terrible fires a year ago. We've asked our witnesses to describe the process insurers use to adjust and pay claims and whether that process has worked for the people who lost their homes in this disaster. Our second panel will look more broadly at state policy that governs homeowners insurance and whether there are changes that we should be making to improve the outcomes for consumers. After our two panels, we'll have time for members of the public to share their thoughts on these issues. For those of you here in the room, there is an agenda and a great staff analysis that's been done on this issue that's available as you come in. And again, thank you to the staff for all their good work in preparing that overview of the issue. So I'm pleased to join my co-chair, Assemblyman Daley. I'd like to offer him the opportunity to make some opening remarks. I'd like to extend that same offer to Senator Dodd and Assemblywoman Aguiar-Curry and other members of the panel who would like to say something before we begin. Chairman Daley.
Thank you, Senator. And I want to also thank Assemblywoman Aguiar-Curry. We're in her district, Senator Dodd's district as well, and this is an important opportunity for us to listen and learn about the efforts to rebuild in the wake of the fires and the insurance issues that are related to this very, very unfortunate last year that we've had, especially here in Northern California. I look forward to hearing from those impacted by the wildfires and from those who are in charge of the rebuilding efforts. I hope to hear today what is working and what isn't working in our competitive, ever-changing insurance marketplace. By listening and learning today, I hope the takeaway for all of us is better understanding and focus on any problems that can be fixed. I want to provide an opportunity for my colleagues to say a few words here before we get into the expert panelists. Mrs. Aguiar-Curry. Aguilar.
Good morning. Thank you very much for coming to our district. It's a shame that we're coming to have this discussion. As I drove over here this morning, I realized that there was red flag alerts again and the wind's blowing, and my heart sinks. So I look forward to the discussion today because we do have to figure out what we can do, how we can make rebuild our communities and bring our families back to whole. So thank you very much for putting this on today, and I appreciate the invitation.
Good. And I imagine Senator Dodd would like to speak.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Senate and Assembly Insurance Committees and staff for thinking this being an important enough issue to come to Napa here. I'm glad that you recognize these important issues, and I look forward to working with you in the upcoming years. I'd also like to thank the other members and witnesses and the public for being here today. As we all know, these wildfires ravaged our districts. Since that time, I've heard from countless constituents about their experiences after the fire. It is absolutely clear that many issues relating to homeowners insurance and the rebuilding process remain. I authored legislation to address some of these issues, but there's still more work that we can do and still more we must do to protect Californians. I'm hoping that this hearing will provide us with the valuable information to guide our legislation in the upcoming years to help previous and future victims of natural disasters. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity again to be here, and just look forward to listening to the important testimony from victims and also from experts in the industry.
Would any of our colleagues like to say anything before we get underway? Assembly members, senators, Mr. Morlock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You and I both come from Orange County, so it's already been mentioned. We call this today's weather a Santa Ana condition, Santa Ana winds, when they come up from the inland and go towards the coast as opposed to the prevailing trade winds. And in 1993, Assemblyman Daley and I experienced a fire in Laguna Beach that destroyed 441 homes. It was about this time in the fall. So this is an important issue, but I just kind of did some review because Laguna Beach is in my district. And the fire was in 1993, and of those homes, 286 were within the city limit. And in 1996, 3 years later, the LA Times did an article saying, okay, what's the status? And only 140 homes had been rebuilt 3 years later out of the 286. So I'm sitting here going, I shouldn't expect an immediate building of homes, you know, but there is a process. And so, Mr. Chair, we've got prior history, and it would be nice to see how we are improving from a good 25 years ago to see what we can do now to find a model of how we all work with government, industry, and the homeowners to try to be as efficient, at least have some benchmarks of where progress should be at what time and how we're improving whatever bumps are in the way. But it is a time-consuming process, and we've experienced it, and that's why I'm here, and I want to thank you for the opportunity.
All right, Senator Glazer, are you ready to
Yeah,
get
there's no
underway?
other opening remarks. Let's start with panel number one. I'd like to invite up Tim Larson, Keith Woods, and Chris Rogers, and let me explain who they are and their expertise that they bring to us this morning. Mr. Larson is an executive general adjuster for the Greenspan Company and Adjusters International. He's an attorney and licensed public adjuster in 7 states. As a public adjuster, he represents consumers when negotiating a claim settlement and can speak to the challenges consumers have had in settling their claims. The second witness is Keith Woods. He's Chief Executive Officer of North Coast Builders Exchange. Mr. Wood heads an association of contractors, architects, engineers, building supply members that span Sonoma, Lake, Mendocino, and Napa counties. And Chris Rogers, who is the Vice Mayor and Council Member from the City of Santa Rosa. Thank you for being here, Chris. He serves on the Rebuilding Committee for the city and the Joint Rebuilding Committee with Sonoma County, and has been closely involved in Santa Rosa's recovery efforts. So with that, we'll begin with Mr. Larson. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me, Senators. I've been asked today to talk about some of the issues that the policyholders have been facing through the adjustment claims for the Santa Rosa fires. I'm going to hit some, just 3 highlights. One of the things, so first and foremost, what does a public adjuster do? We represent the insured through the claims process. We negotiate, we interpret insurance contract language, and we negotiate a fair settlement for the insured. Some of the things that I've seen through the representation of some of the folks here in Santa Rosa, the issues that they face in the adjustment process is one of elongating the process. So if you want to look at the umbrella of issue that I'm faced with when representing clients, is it's taking a long time to adjust these claims. And what I'm seeing across the board is, for most insurers, is a lot of turnover of adjusters. So what does that mean? We'll start out at the beginning of the fire and we'll have one adjuster. 2 months later, a new adjuster is assigned. A week later, a new adjuster is assigned. I've had some claims where we've had 10 adjusters in the last 12 months. Why does that elongate the process? Every time you get a new adjuster, you got to re-educate the adjuster on what's going on with the file, and time is lost. They have to get up to speed. They have to talk to their supervisors. They have to understand what's going on with the file. And frankly, it's to the detriment of the insured. So I would say that's the number one issue that my clients are facing. The number 2 issue that I've come across is oftentimes I'll come in after the claim is a few weeks old and the carrier has stepped in and started working with the insured. When I step in, I go through the policy and I advise the insured of all their contractual rights. Oftentimes, the insured is just finding out about what their rights are. I think the insurance industry can do a better job of advising their insureds up front as to what the contract provides in terms of coverages and what are the insured's rights. That's the number 2 thing. Number 3 thing is valuation. So when the insurance companies come in, oftentimes they hire folks from out of state, and there's an industry-wide program that is used to value the replacement or repair of a house. It's called Xactimate. And that program is merely a tool. You can't hire Xactimate to rebuild your house. You have to hire a contractor, and the contractor is going to tell you what the market value and the market price is for the rebuild of your home. The 2 valuations, the Xactimate and the market, aren't oftentimes congruent with each other. So you've got, on one hand, you've got the insurance industry using a tool, and that tool is then used to settle the claim, but it's not reality. You can't use, oftentimes, the monies that Xactimate is coming up with for the rebuild of the home are not sufficient for market conditions. Either labor's too low or materials are too low or both. So those are the 3 highlight issues. It's valuation, turnover, and the insured's really understanding the contractual rights. Those are the 3 things that I've found that kind of elongate the process. The valuation is, I'm still negotiating 12 months out from the fire with insurance companies on the true repair value or replacement value of their home. So imagine if you're trying to rebuild your home and you're trying to plan for the future, you don't really have you don't know your budget for the rebuild, so you can't really start the process of hiring your contractor and hiring your engineers and your architects until you've settled on that number. So that's going to elongate the process.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Larson, for your insight. And I know there's going to be some questions, but I want to go through the panel first, and then we'll come back and allow questions from my colleagues. Mr. Woods, thank you for being here. Chief Executive Officer of the North Coast Builders Exchange. We appreciate your wisdom and insight.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. It's a bit intimidating, not because just the panel is so distinguished, but I look at the list of panelists. I'm the only one I've never heard of. And this is extremely intimidating. It's good to see my friend Senator Dodd. Thank you for all your work. Let me explain North Coast Builders Exchange, what perspective I want to bring. We have roughly 1,250 members related to the construction industry, where we represent Sonoma, Napa, Lake, and Mendocino County. So we've been in the middle of all of the rebuild efforts for the past year. 850 of our members are licensed contractors, half are general contractors, half are subcontractors, and I've been in touch with them over the past year to try and get a real feel for how our organization can help and what the issues are. I'm no expert on insurance. I'll leave that to the second panel, but I can bring you a builder's perspective of what's actually happening literally on the ground out there and the difficulties they're facing that I think has a real impact on your topic today. I do want to add, if you read this, you'll know everything almost that you need to know. This is an incredible document. The informational hearing document, everything in here is, in my view, 100% correct and accurate in depicting what's actually happening out there on the ground. The staff has suggested some suggested topics. I'll limit my comments to that. I will note that there are two themes going on in Sonoma County where we're headquartered. One is the formal theme we've adopted of Sonoma Strong. Let me explain to you that I've believed for the past year there's a second theme that explains it all. It's Sonoma Uncertain. We have fire victims who still, in great numbers, do not know what they're going to do, whether they can afford to rebuild or even want to rebuild for a number of reasons. I might also note on the agenda, the only thing I might correct, the title of our session, not correct, but supplement, is Rebuilding After the Fire. Well, let me tell you what's really going on out there is it's building after the fire, not necessarily rebuilding. I've talked to hundreds of contractors, building officials throughout the area, and less than 5% of people who lost a home, I repeat, less than 5% of those people are going to actually rebuild the home that they lost. And it's for a variety of reasons. Older folks don't want two-story homes anymore. They want one-story homes. As they settle up on insurance, they're finding out their 4,000 square foot home was insured for what will rebuild a 2,500 to 2,800 square foot home. There are others who were going to retire anyway, wanted to move away, whatever. And a whole lot of people are rebuilding a home that's different to what they had because they always wanted to upgrade and update that home. So it's a combination of rebuilding and building that's going on. Topics quickly that I was asked to address. What's the best practice to establish replacement costs? Well, in your report here, it refers to normal costs. Well, there's nothing normal about what we experience. The magnitude of the North Bay fires, as I refer to them, the magnitude has thrown everything into flux, and it's what we're dealing with on the insurance side, but also on the contractor side. I met with a bunch of contractors, a number of them, in anticipation of this, to try and give a flavor of what they're experiencing. And when I asked them this question about establishing replacement costs, they said the onus is really back on the homeowner. That the construction industry may have failed locally to explain the process, but it really gets back to the fire victim to do their homework with all of the resources available and take advantage of them. What the contractor said is, if you've had a home that you lost, go find a home that's being rebuilt somewhat in your size, in your neighborhood, and find out what those building costs are from the contractors doing the work. It's roughly in Coffey Park, which lost 1,300 homes. Chris, $240 to $290 is the rebuilding per square foot cost that most of the builders are experiencing. Up in Fountain Grove, it ranges from $325 to $500 on the low side per square foot, and $600 to $800 or more on the high side. The majority of underinsureds are trying to build a custom home, and that's part of the difficulty. It's so much easier down in Coffee Park with flat lots than the hillside lots. What I was told by the builders is the hillside lots and the cost of building that goes into that can add anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 to the cost of rebuilding as opposed to down in a flat lot. Production homes are what's going on in Coffee Park area with the 1,300 homes. Very few people, as I said, are rebuilding the home they lost. It is far more efficient, effective, and they can get a guaranteed price per square foot by having a builder come in and say, I've got 12 models, you pick one, we'll handle all the construction and the finishing, no change orders, and next time we see you, we'll hand you your keys to the house. Because that's the only way a contractor can give a guaranteed price if they don't have to get into a homeowner saying in the middle of a project, you know, my brother-in-law builds kitchen cabinets, how about if you use him? That doesn't work. I'd add the price differences that I was asked about in areas affected by the fire. Boy, as I just noted, it's the hillside homes that will take much longer to rebuild and have less of a rebuild in percentage-wise than, say, a Coffee Park or a Lark Field. That primary driver is the property and whether it's flat or a hillside. Finally, I was asked about prices to build in September of 2017 and then in October, November of 2017, pre-fire and post-fire. I was surprised when the dozens of contractors that I talked to said there's really not that much difference. I mean, building costs themselves in September versus October, they're really fairly similar if you priced a home. The biggest consideration and the problem we're facing is labor costs. You can automatically add, they said, anywhere from 20 to 25% of the cost of building pre-fire versus building post-fire, and that's because of the magnitude of the disaster has led to competition for labor like we've never experienced before. And so that's the materials go up and down a little bit. Architectural changes lead to higher prices. And I will close by saying with the state has done a wonderful job over the years in code changes for safety, green building, etc., but it's also come with a price tag. One home builder that built a home in Coffee Park in 1986 added up took those plans and what it would cost to bring those plans up to code today, and it added just over $102,000. So I appreciate the code changes and the intention of them, but it does come with a price tag, and homeowners are getting sticker shock at what it costs to bring a home up to code, which is why they're choosing not to rebuild. Thank you again for inviting me. I'll welcome questions.
Thank you, Mr. Woods, for your testimony and your insight. And I'm sure there will be some questions in just a moment. I'd like to invite our third panelist to share his wisdom, Chris Rogers, the Vice Mayor and Council Member from the City of Santa Rosa. Mr. Rogers, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I want to echo a lot of the comments that my colleague just made. We're really experiencing this disaster as a community and trying to figure out how to get through it as a community. I know you'll hear a little bit later from United policyholders. A survey was done. 2/3 of Santa Rosans that lost their home were underinsured by more than $300,000. And if you look in your packet, over half of my constituents have not had a chance to find a number that works with them and with their insurance to actually start rebuilding their home. So when we talk about the numbers of why we haven't rebuilt more in our community, we're actually very proud that we have over 1,000 homes in Santa Rosa under construction, about 1/3 of what was lost. That's really fast when you consider how extensive the debris cleanup was and some of the other challenges that we've met. But where people are really having a hard time is in getting that number from their insurance. And I am hearing over and over again from my constituents in Fountain Grove that they are being pressured to sign on the dotted line on an agreement before they've been able to even find a contractor to give them a bid for rebuilding their home. A lot of that is around the 18-month mark that they have for temporary assistance. And that is, if I had to choose one thing for you to take a look at, it'd be an extension of that 18 months. As has been said, we are in a new normal where the devastation is a lot more extensive than past fires. When you have a fire like this, you create its own economic climate, and the response is not going to be the same. So not only was the debris cleanup longer than it should have been, but we've also noticed different quirks, if you will, that have come up from this. We had a water system up in Fountain Grove that literally melted and created a benzene issue in the soil that prevented people from being able to move forward with their rebuild up until we cleared this actually beginning of the month. So it took us a year to clear the soil of the benzene to make sure that it was safe for people to rebuild. So those folks who have been living in temporary housing only have 6 months left at this point of that temporary assistance before they're expected to be back in their home. That's not going to happen. We had Journey's End, a mobile home park, where 44 of the units were not destroyed, were largely not damaged by the fire, but the water system was destroyed and contaminated at Journey's End, which means that those 44 homes cannot reoccupy their home, and they also cannot be paid out by their insurance because they haven't been condemned. They're sitting in limbo. So this 18 months really is not enough in order for my constituents to begin the recovery process, even moving as quickly as we've been moving. And I will tell you, City of Santa Rosa, a lot of our job has been to remove barriers to have people move forward. Once they have their plans and submit it to the city, it takes 5 to 7 days to do the plan check. The delay is largely not on government bureaucracy, which I think most people are pretty surprised to hear. It's actually on the insurance companies in trying to get these settlements done. As I said, in a lot of ways, this 18-month metric is being used to try to leverage settlements faster for my constituents, many of whom are reporting that they are getting lowballed and they feel like they have no options but to sign. One thing I would ask this committee to do is to revisit some of the insurance bills that were introduced in this committee in 2017. Senator Dodd, Assemblywoman Aguiar-Curry, Senator McGuire, Assemblymember Wood, they all brought forward really thoughtful legislation that would help my constituents. As I said, every additional delay or every additional cost makes it more likely that Santa Rosans don't rebuild their home. One bill in particular from Senator McGuire would have allowed people to be paid out for their items in their home that were destroyed without having to go through the process of itemizing every single issue. That is a significant and re-traumatic experience for my constituents. And when we talk about the aggregate of what they have to go through, the hoops that they have to jump through in order to rebuild, that's the one that I hear more often than not, where people want to throw up their hands and say, what was the point of having insurance? I'd really encourage you to revisit those bills. The other thing that I'd encourage you to do is look at some of the odd quirks that make their way into insurance policies. Many folks in Fountain Grove had told me that in their insurance plan was a requirement that they rebuild their home within 10% of its original footprint. As Mr. Wood said, when you're looking at $600 a square foot or $800 a square foot to rebuild your home, sometimes the only way it's going to pencil out is if you build smaller. And a lot of these policies are saying that people have to still be within 10% on the bottom end. I understand the intent is that they won't go hog wild and build way bigger than they had. It's actually preventing people from being able to rebuild because they can't rebuild smaller. Finally, I would ask that this committee really do a good job of looking at this from a holistic standpoint, not just insurance for recovery, but looking at the FEMA process as well. What FEMA will pay for versus what insurance will pay for. We are finding ways that is challenging. I'll give you 2 examples. Many of your communities, I'm sure, made the move years ago to require sidewalk repairs to be done by homeowners. It's been pretty standard throughout the state now. The way that this is played out in a disaster is, for our city, those sidewalks are now being repaired using insurance dollars because FEMA will not cover them, because FEMA has said that it's actually on the onus of the homeowner. So particularly when it comes to debris removal, where we had these big tractors that were working their way on our streets and on our sidewalks and doing damage, that is not covered by FEMA. When you look at damaged trees, FEMA will cover a tree if it is 4 inches in diameter, 6 feet tall, and from the ground up, but it will not cover the roots and it will not cover the stump. That will fall on insurance or that will fall on the city. There are I'd say, ridiculous, exact definitions that are having to be met. And if the state laws and if FEMA operating procedures aren't coinciding with one another, it leaves homeowners in limbo. I'll pause there, and I'll see if there are any questions.
Mr. Rogers, thank you for your testimony. I can feel from your voice and your emotions that you've been in the middle of this, and it's been a difficult time for you and your community, and I certainly appreciate the insight that you brought to us today. Thank you very much. I want to invite my colleagues on the panel, Assembly and Senators who have questions for this panel to please so indicate. I'll start with Senator Galgiani. Welcome.
Chair. My first question is for our first panelist. You mentioned the high turnover in adjusters. What is the rationale for that? What do you think are the causes that have led to that?
Staffing. They weren't prepared. They being the insurance companies, and this is their business model. This is how they travel around the country. That's how they staff these storms. They don't keep these people in place for very long because next thing you know, there's another storm in Florida and they have to go there. So they're constantly being turned over. And it's hard, frankly, it's hard to establish relationships with these adjusters because they're not there very long. You know, you develop a rapport and, you know, you may get this claim settled a little bit faster, but as soon as another storm comes along, they're gone.
So it's not that they're quitting the company per se, but the company is choosing to move them around based on the order of priorities at the time?
I would agree with that statement. I mean, I don't work for the insurance companies, but that's the only conclusion I can reach.
I mean, certainly any time that we're dealing with any company or bureaucracy when there's not an understanding of the basics and somebody gets shifted and you're starting a whole process all over, it's obvious that that's going to extend the time frame and it's going to exacerbate the problem. So it sounds like it's a choice as with regard to the insurance company.
Here's another thing, another issue with that. We are getting adjusters from all over the country that are not savvy with California law. So they may adjust a claim differently in Texas, Iowa, Idaho, but we have very specific laws here in California that protect our insureds. And I'll give you an example. I have a client that chose to buy a new house. You can replace or you can rebuild per the contract. Now, my client bought a house that was 50 years old, hadn't been remodeled in 50 years. They lived in Fountain Grove. Their house was 10 years old. When you replace your home, contractually, you're allowed to buy a house of like kind and quality. If the house that you buy is 50 years old and your house that you lost is 10 years old, you should be able to remodel that 50-year-old home to bring it to the standards of like kind and quality that you had. Well, I had an adjuster that was working out of Illinois, and I said, well, my client has bought a new house, but they want to remodel it. It's not like kind and quality. And the answer I received was, if it has a bathroom and a kitchen, they have to move in. And that's not what California law, that's not what their contract says. But he doesn't know that because A, he doesn't know California law, B, he's not familiar with the California policy. So you have to educate these folks along the way.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from colleagues? Senator Lara.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Larson. When it came to the technology and the data that's being used to the software that the adjusters use, you mentioned that as an issue for producing inaccurate repair rates and estimates. What do you consider? What are some recommendations that you think we need to do to make sure that we're actually getting the accurate data and the appropriate rates?
Yeah, the program they use is one. I think that it'd be prudent upon insurance carriers to bring in from the very beginning local contractors to help them establish the replacement price. And that's often what they do. But the first salvo is to send you an Xactimate estimate. And some of the insureds may accept that and just say, well, I guess this is all I'm going to get. I got to figure out how to rebuild my house. The next level, if you complain, is for them to hire a building consultant. But they don't typically do that from the beginning. They put together this Xactimate estimate, and then they present it and say, well, here's your settlement.
Thank you. And for the Vice Mayor, thank you for your testimony. You did bring up an issue that I've been contemplating about. We talk about the insurance issue and addressing the fires. We tend to just think of it as an economic issue and not really take into consideration the human element when it comes to public health, food supply, and all these things that are imperative. Now, the coordination amongst agencies to be able to address these issues with the local air quality board, how do we address food supply issues and security and the public health aspect? Can you just share some thoughts on how is there any coordination? How do we coordinate? Because these are things that you brought up now that we in the legislature, for me, was trying to get people to replace their home immediately. But how can you if there's a massive environmental issue now that arises? What about folks that have not as good immune systems that we need to now address in terms of the air quality that remains? So can you share your thoughts and your experiences in terms of the coordination of different agencies, just to give us some more perspective on that?
Yeah, I think when it comes to Cal OES, I think they've done a fantastic job for our community. They've come in and they've really tried to help us navigate some of the federal rules and obligations that are there. But there are so many unknowns that we're trying to prepare for, both in terms of how things are going to end up costing us on the back end. We have specific consultants that we have brought in to do our documentation to make sure that when we get audited by FEMA, that we don't end up having to give additional dollars back. But there are things that our staff are learning as they go, such as the sidewalk issue. We're currently in a prolonged battle with FEMA over correcting or paying for the sidewalks. And every single dollar that we have to put towards things like that take away dollars for our unmet need throughout our community. Santa Rosa, for context, had a 1% vacancy rate before the fire. And what we saw was folks who were living on the margins were displaced automatically, in large part because those who lost their homes, who had insurance to be able to pay for their housing, were willing to pay $5,000, $6,000, up to $12,000, I've heard, a month for rent. And so landlords were displacing renters for those individuals. Those are those vulnerable folks that you're talking about. And what's going to happen is when their 18 months of assistance runs out, those folks are also, who are living on the margins, are going to have to find their own housing as well in a market that's tight, in an area that's expensive. We've seen this throughout the whole community.
Now, just what percentage of people, if you know, have decided to relocate as opposed to rebuild, given just how difficult it is to rebuild?
So that's a hard one to answer. We actually, in our monthly meetings, we get an update on which lots have been sold. And that's an indication, but it doesn't tell us if people have relocated within the city or if they've gone elsewhere. I know that there's probably some data that's out there that you can get, but we were told to expect somewhere between a third and half of folks who lost their homes to not rebuild in Santa Rosa. Right now, I think we're on the low end of that. I think we're around 20-25% from some of the surveys that I've seen. So we're doing a little bit better, but that's a significant chunk of folks from Santa Rosa.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Lara. Assemblymember Gibson.
Thank you very much, and thank the committee chairs and bringing us all together. Certainly this has rocked Sacramento, rocked California, because it's certainly nothing that we have ever imagined. We are in uncharted waters when it comes down to the amount of fires that we have occurred thus far. I want to thank my colleagues because I know they were on the battlefield trying to do everything they can legislatively to try to address some of these issues. And my question is for Councilman or Mayor Rogers. What can be the 3 takeaways that you would like for us to consider when we return back to Sacramento in January?
Yeah, I think I mentioned one of them, which is that better coordination or understanding of what FEMA will pay for versus what insurance pays for, and helping us to understand how to rebuild through that process. The other one, we talk a lot about rebuilding better, not just building back to what we had, but addressing some of the challenges that have been facing all of our communities in California to begin with. And I'll give you an example. Obviously, housing has been tough for people to come by in California even before the fires. If there was a way for Sacramento to address not just spending dollars to put somebody in an apartment complex for 18 months and try to move them forward that way while they rebuild their home, but actually we as a city, we've flipped our building codes to allow ADUs or secondary units to be built first on a property. If some of the investment was forward-looking to build those secondary units for folks to live in while they're rebuilding their homes, then we come out of it not just stronger, but with additional housing stock. So looking at ways to rebuild better, help folks to hit their environmental goals as well in that rebuild process. And I should mention there's a good partnership, City of Santa Rosa, County of Sonoma, and Sonoma Clean Power, that actually put together an energy package to allow people to rebuild net zero energy at no additional cost. It's things like that that we need help and we need tools to provide throughout other communities as well. We just happen to have a CCA that allows us to do that. And then the third one, and I don't mean to harp on it too much, but sensible things like the itemization issue around contents really does have a significant impact on people's psyches going forward and trying to get them to rebuild. So extension of the 18 months needs to be looked at as well.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. I have Senator Morlock, Assemblymember Grayson, and Cooley next. Senator Morlock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Larson, could you explain what your company is and what your job is?
Sure. So my company is a firm that represents the insureds. The insurance companies send out their adjusters, and the adjusters for the insurance companies represent the insurance company. I represent the insured through the claims process.
So you're someone that...
We will do everything. We help the insured with their inventory. We help the insured with the valuation of their building, and we help the insured with negotiation of their relocation benefits.
And then how are you compensated for those services?
We take a fee. We take a commission off the total recover.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Grayson.
Thank you. And it is quite clear that the fires were very, very devastating for the past couple of years in a row. However, it's also just as clear that that devastation didn't end when we put the fire out. It has continued and manifested through the hardships that property owners are experiencing right now. Mr. Larson, you had mentioned that people were unaware of their rights and that this was your number 2 issue. Were there any efforts that you know of, broad-based, that went out to try to help people and educate them on their rights for insurance coverage?
Well, I've seen a lot of literature put out by the state, local municipalities. I know that the insurance companies train their staff to go through their policy with the insureds, but I think they need to do a better job of it.
Okay. And then also, quite right from Mr. Wood, as far as the updates and codes and all of that, you know, someone may buy a house and 15 years later something devastating happens and they lose that house, and over the time codes have been updating. Are you aware of any efforts that are made by insurance companies to reach out to their clients or to property owners that they insure to help them to understand that a code update may have caused them to become underinsured?
Interesting question that I'll leave to the insurance experts, but I've not heard of a lot of that. I talk to existing homeowners to say, look, the lesson out of the disaster is go review your policy. Those of you who still have homes, fire risk, all of California we've learned is at fire risk. So everybody ought to look at their policy and understand it. I don't know that the code changes are built into this, into a rebuild in insurance policies, but it's something that if it's not in there, ought to be looked at because people are getting sticker shock in a number of ways, but this is leading the list. Is you can look at 50 to 100,000 more for an average home before you even put a shovel in the ground. And I'm not arguing against the codes. These were all, they made sense, and it's just the accumulation of them over the years has added a heck of a big cost to the building or rebuilding of a home.
I appreciate that answer. And then back to Mr. Larson, I heard you answer Senator Morlock's question about the company and what you do, how you're compensated, but how are your services retained?
Well, it's either through referral, we market.
So when there's a crisis or a disaster, you move into that area and then you kind of blanket the area with marketing?
Marketing, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember Grayson. Assemblymember Cooley.
I just wanted to jump in and offer a comment about this whole process. One of the distinctive things about this type of fire is the loss of foundations to homes. And anybody who is in a hillside location with an older home, likelihood of needing a new foundation is going to meet new seismic standards. So there's a crossover of the earthquake risk when you have a home on a hillside location in California that's immediately going to jump your costs. Another factor to kind of look at, and the contrast is, if you have an isolated home fire, fire trucks roll up, they knock down the fire, they cool down the site. This type of mass loss, the ash should just collapse in upon the structure itself. It can just stay hot for a day and a half, and that intense heat is what destroys the foundation. So that's a part of this experience of these very intensive losses just scaling through the roof. Some of the Santa Rosa neighborhoods were not hillside neighborhoods, but some were, and that spills over. I think for us as members sitting here, I just want to say I've sat through a lot of these hearings in my career. And I think the thing that I would say just for us as colleagues to focus upon, California law does regulate claims practices. There's an Unfair Claims Practices Act. And this issue of changing adjusters, I think you could form an opinion, runs afoul of that act. Because the key operative standards on the Unfair Claim Practices Act, so that's the law that we've adopted, is knowingly committing or performing with such frequency as to indicate a general business practice, any of the following unfair claim settlement practices. So you can sort of, as you sit here, you listen, okay, are carriers performing a certain type of activity with such frequency as to indicate a general business practice? Some of the testimony kind of addresses that issue. What is the key rule? Failing to adopt and implement reasonable standards for the prompt investigation and processing of claims arising under insurance policies. So, for example, with the turnover of adjusters, there is a question of, is that actually a fair business practice when each time the new adjuster in that new conversation for the insured becomes like pulling the scab off the wound again. Just continually have, sort of a Groundhog Day in the middle of a catastrophic claim. This is not good. And so I would just say, as we sit and listen to this hearing, that's a key takeaway for us as members. We're not the insurance commissioner, but we can ask ourselves, are we hearing about repetitive practices, seen to be a general business practice, that under the circumstances just seem to us as perhaps unfair. And we have enough law on the books already to kind of ask questions in that direction and urge change in order to meet the law.
Assemblymember, if I could jump in and piggyback on your comment too really fast about the the foundations, because I'm really trying to give this committee real examples of what Santa Rosans are going through and Sonoma County residents are going through. In the debris cleanup process, there was an attempt to leave foundations intact where possible and to leave driveways intact where possible, obviously trying to shift some of the costs away from rebuilding a home. What has actually happened is there have been a number of homes, couple hundred, that are currently working their way through a resolution process because they were over-excavated or more was taken than should have. We've heard some really horror stories of people's swimming pools being taken, their driveways being taken when they didn't need to be, because at the time perhaps FEMA was paying per ton and not per lot. And so my constituents are really trying to figure out how do they move forward with their insurance companies when they still have not been able to resolve that over-excavation issue yet. And it's been incredibly difficult.
Thank you. Any other questions from my colleagues? I did have a final question. Mr. Woods, you talked about labor costs going up 20 to 25%. And part of that's perfectly understandable given the demand. Any thoughts about what we could do about that?
Well, it may not be in your purview, but a dotted line out from this panel ought to be to support any and all CTE programs, trainings, union or non-union. We need workers, and the problem has become that serious. It's a supply and demand in labor. I have 20 contractors who have told me that when they leave a job site that they're working on Friday afternoon, they're not sure those same workers will be back Monday morning, because both out-of-state contractors and less scrupulous ones are following employees as they leave a job site saying, how much you make in an hour? I'll give you $5 or $10 an hour more. And that's pretty attractive to somebody. So this labor shortage is going to slow down the rebuilding process, which the Vice Mayor talked about how many homes are underway. Well, the number's impressive till we look at the aggregate and we realize that this is, I've said it from the beginning, a 3 to 5 year building process and rebuilding at minimum, and more likely a decade before the North Bay looks anything like it used to. And the heart of that will be shortage of labor.
Thank you very much. I want to conclude this panel by thanking each of you for coming and bringing your insight. Tim, I heard you clearly talk about the changing adjusters, the elongation of the process, the lack of clarity on rights under the contract, and the national valuation tools and the problems that that come about because of that. Thank you for your insight. Mr. Woods, I appreciate the on-the-ground wisdom that you bring, not just on building costs seemingly similar, but labor costs escalating, and certainly your insight about code changes and the costs that they bring is an important data point, even if it's an uncomfortable one. So thank you for that. And Vice Mayor, I think that there's no doubt that you and your community are feeling this harder than anyone, with good reason. And the concerns that you've raised about the 18-month time limit, the itemization requirements, the clearing settlements, all very relevant. The FEMA versus insurance and who pays, all very important. And I did find your insight about how we could rebuild better, starting with second units, as a great pearl of wisdom that I hope and I'm sure my colleagues will take away from your testimony today. Thank you all for being here and for sharing your thoughts. All right, so we're going to go to panel number 2 and invite them up as I introduce them to you. But the second panel is going to focus on underinsurance, particularly when numerous homes are lost at the same time and the cost to rebuild skyrocket. This creates a big problem. The insurance to value represents a ratio of insurance coverage to the actual cost to rebuild. When it's too low, the home is underinsured and homeowners won't have enough coverage to rebuild the house. So providing insight on these issues this morning, we have with us Amy Bach, Rob Dare, if I'm pronouncing that right, Dar, Lloyd Dixon, and Rex Frazier. Amy Bach is the Executive Director of United Policyholders. United Policyholders is an advocacy and assistance organization that works directly with homeowners. Rob is a partner of George Peterson Insurance Agency in Santa Rosa. He's a partner at the agency. He'll discuss his clients' experiences with the recent fires and what his agency does to suggest appropriate coverage levels. Mr. Dixon is director of the RAND Center for Catastrophic Risk Management and Compensation. Dr. Dixon will present findings from California's fourth climate change assessment. While the study does look at future implications of climate change, it assesses current insurance market trends in a high-risk fire area in the Sierra Nevadas. And finally, Rex Frazier, he's the president of the Personal Insurance Federation of California. We refer to it as PIF. It represents the largest insurers in the state and focuses on personal, auto, and homeowners insurance. Thank you all for being here. We'll start with Amy. Ms. Bach, thank you for being here.
Good morning, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to share information, be of service. I feel like I'm among many longtime colleagues here, and United Policyholders, for those of you who are not aware, is a 501c3 nonprofit. We started right actually before the Oakland-Berkeley fire in '91. So our first experience in a catastrophic wildfire was that one, which at the time was, of course, the record breaker. Since that time, we've had a number of others. But our organization runs 3 programs that are relevant to your inquiry today. One is called the Roadmap to Preparedness, where we're giving people buying tips and guidance based on what we learn in the Roadmap to Recovery, where we go in after there's been a disaster and we offer a series of educational events in partnership generally with the local public officials, and we give people guidance on how to collect their benefits, what their rights are, and then a lot of suggestions for troubleshooting and overcoming obstacles. We take the lessons we learn there, we feed that into the Roadmap to Preparedness program to try to teach people how to avoid some of the problems that disaster survivors have had with not having enough insurance, not having records, all that sort of thing. So then the third program is the Advocacy in Action, and that's where we work with elected officials like yourselves to try to come up with strategic ways, either through legislation or other means of trying to solve these problems. But I'm here to say, sadly, that we really haven't made a whole lot of progress on some levels, and it's not because there aren't laws. There are good, strong laws. As Ken Cooley pointed out, we do have unfair claims practices in the code. We've got the fair claims handling regulations. We've got the industry standards. And so it's not necessarily an issue of needing to pass more laws. It's more we've got to enforce the ones we've got. And I think we've really got to have a lot more cooperation from the industry for their own good. So I just want to review a couple of quick issues. The underinsurance problem, the gaps, the adjusting issues, you've already been talking about them with the prior panel, what laws we already have on the books, and then, of course, you passed a number of new ones this session. And then just the marketplace. I think ultimately, I would imagine your real goal here is, okay, let's do this better next time. And what do we got coming? I think there's just a general feeling out there that, yes, this has been an awful wildfire season. 2017, we all are happy to see it in the rearview mirror. 2018, though, not that much better. So knowing that and knowing how what we have in our marketplace, we have private competitive insurance companies, the brand names you all recognize. We've got the surplus lines, less regulated companies that you're going to be hearing a lot more about since they're picking up portions of the market that the brand names are leaving. And then you have our quasi-government fallbacks. We've got the FAIR Plan, and the CEA. So those are the 4 main areas, and I know you want me to keep my remarks pretty short. So I'll just recap. You got the survey results. Hugh Sladen put those in your meeting materials. Our organization, starting from week 1, before the fires were fully contained, Atlas and Tubbs, we had a table with the Department of Insurance and Sonoma County building at the local assistance center, which once it became federal, it became a DRC. So my organization was there. We had volunteers who came in from wildfire areas to give people just a little bit of a shoulder to cry on, and then our organization puts out very basic information about what you can expect and what your rights are and how to avoid problems. Rotating adjusters has been a chronic problem. The legislature already took a crack at it with requiring that if the company changes adjusters more than, I think it's like more than 3 in a 6-month period, you have to get a status report. So but that's an example of something that you guys did, but I don't really think it's getting carried out in real life. The same thing with you know, the insured is supposed to be given a copy of their policy within 30 days. And it sounds basic, but again, these things are not happening the way they should. The policyholder, there's just a mass amount of misinformation, confusion out there. And I know we can improve that by continuing to do more collaboration. The Department of Insurance has been a fantastic collaborator with our agency. So has the city of Santa Rosa. They've been partnering every time we do a workshop. We've done well over 18 of them at the same place in downtown Santa Rosa. We've done 3 in Napa, and every time we do them, public officials participate. Senator Dodd's aide was at one of our recent ones. The DOI has sent a representative to almost every one. So I think we have we call it the Roadmap to Recovery. We don't engage insurers as much as maybe we could, but I will tell you that at the beginning of the legislative session, I did try to convene a meeting with as many insurer reps as I knew from my many years of being a consumer advocate on insurance up there, and your staff members to sort of say, okay, insurers, let's see if we can, you know, keep you out of the papers a little bit here and get your customers a little bit happier and not have the same fights that we always have with, you know, do you have to require this itemization when everything is gone? Really, you know, do you have to rotate adjusters without continuity? You know, could we fix these things? But we really didn't get very far in our little meeting, and so now, just to bring it back to the end of my remarks, because I am looking forward to answering any questions. Clearly, there are major gaps here in people's coverage, and you've been hearing, again, this is not the first time the legislature has looked at the estimating tools that insurers are using at the point of sale. There was a hearing after the San Diego wildfires where the executives from Marshall Swift Beck were brought in to say, how come you guys are getting it wrong? What's going on here? So again, we have been trying to, you know, the legislature has done a number of disclosure bills. You've done a number of bills to try to get the consumer more aware, to pay attention that there are differences in different kind of policies. But what we haven't solved is the fact that the consumer relies at the point of sale on the professionals. They don't know anything about insurance. They don't know anything about real estate other than maybe what they paid for their house. Maybe they know how much square footage. They have zero idea about what their insurance needs are. And that's why I always assumed that an insurance agent, broker, professional, that's what they get their commission for. They don't get a commission just from passing the payment, you know, from the consumer to the company. They do have a role. That said, they are between a rock and a hard place because they don't get a lot of discretion in terms of what number they put. They are given a software program to use to generate a quote, and they do that. So I'm not as interested in pointing fingers of blame as I am at finding solutions. But I will tell you, I think in general, the insurance companies they're just not used to this many total losses at once. It really, to be colloquial, it freaks them out completely. They don't like to bend the rules. They treat these claims very much like they treat all their claims. They are not used to this kind of organized pushback from their clients. But this is the reality of a mass disaster. We've got to do better. So I thank you for being here with that goal in mind.
Thank you, Ms. Block, and thank you for bringing your many years of experience and wisdom and insight to our panel today. And I'm sure there'll be questions in just a couple minutes. Mr. Dare, am I pronouncing that right? You're
Yes, it's DARE.
Dare, you're a
Thank
partner in an insurance agency. You're selling policies, talking through with consumers what they're getting and what they're not getting. Obviously, you've seen the same thing that we have seen here and you've experienced, which is a big challenge when you have such a massive catastrophe that we've experienced, that you have experienced. So what insight do you bring from all of that?
Well, a little bit of background on our agency, just to give you some perspective. We had 1,900 claims at the peak last October, November. Of those claims, 254 were total home losses. So, you know, that's, in our community, that's, you know, hundreds of our friends, the people that we play, you know, our kids play soccer together, baseball, et cetera. The business owners that we insure. So very, very personal situation for us and our employees. Right now, the most recent numbers that I've seen, we've got just under 600 million in fire claims now. So we haven't taken on a tremendous amount of staff to deal with this. It's just been the employees that we've got. We've got 82 employees in Santa Rosa, have all just been stepping up and working hard to take care of our clients and policyholders. And from, I want to make clear there's two sides of distribution within the agency plan. You know, we are what's called an independent agent. So we're brokers. We represent multiple insurance companies. The other side of the distribution is the direct writers. So that's the Farmers, the State Farm, Allstate, AAA. So, you know, I'm here to represent, you know, the independent agency side and specifically, you know, how we do things within our agency. So, you know, when we talk to a homeowner or a potential somebody who's buying a home or somebody who owns a home and they want to talk to us about potentially moving their insurance to us, you know, what our agents do is they talk to them about the house. You know, with the internet right now, in today's day and age, you know, you can go on Zillow and see 50, 80 pictures of a house to get a real idea of what that house is all about. But we talk to them, you know, if it's an existing home, or we talk to them about what sort of upgrades they've made, how recently the upgrades have been, have there been additions that they've made to the house. And then we've got standards as an agency that we have for a cost per square foot. You know, pre-fire, we weren't insuring anything for under $200 a foot anywhere in Santa Rosa. Certain areas of Santa Rosa, we would be insuring houses for $350 a foot, $400 a foot. And then on top of that, we would add extended replacement costs. So if that's a coverage that we can provide to our clients, anywhere from, for us, it's really 50% additional. So if you've got something insured for $200 a foot, it'll give you $300 a foot at that 50% level. We've got many of our clients with 100% extended replacement costs. So a lot of the homes that we lost, our clients lost in Santa Rosa, were insured for, you know, $400 a foot with 50% on top of that. Talking to the client, learning about the house, then the next step for us is to run the specs on that house through a replacement cost estimator that the insurance carriers have. So we'll go out to multiple carriers and run through that model that they have to get an idea of where they think, those models think the price should be. In some instances, they come in fairly what we feel where they should be. In some cases, we feel they're low, and we'll go back to the client, talk to them about where we think it needs to be, and then go negotiate that higher value with the insurance company. So that's kind of the process that we do. You know, it's only as good to the earlier panel as the numbers they have plugged into those software programs. But you know, we had one of our carriers we write a lot of business with, post-fire, within 3 weeks of the fires last year, they put the minimum standard at $300 a foot in their replacement cost estimator because they saw what was happening with the replacement costs and the demand surge coming. So,
Mr. Deere, it sounds like that at least for your agency, and I don't know how many hundreds of people that have been affected that you've covered, that they seem to be satisfied then that they're getting the they're getting the money that they think they need to rebuild, and is that what we're hearing?
For us in particular, yes. We've got about a handful of people that we think there might be a situation of underinsurance. And you know what that, I mean, ultimately, you know, the what to insure the house for is the homeowner's responsibility, but they need help from, you know, us as professionals to help them figure out what that's going to cost. So, you know, I think to hear that, you know, and I hear this all the time in Santa Rosa, how many hundreds and hundreds of people are underinsured. And, you know, part of that, I mean, you know, there is price sensitivity on the buyer's part. So if it's somebody buying their first home, if they've got, you know, $800 to budget for homeowners insurance and we're proposing something that might be $1,100, they're going to push back to try to get it closer to what they've got available to pay. So, and then we run into agents that will, you know, if we pin the replacement cost at $500,000 on a house, they may insure it for $400 and try to convince this homeowner to insure it for $400, and then they'll put some extended replacement costs to get to that $500, and that's going to save them not a lot of money, but it's going to save them some money. But when you have a disaster on the scale that we had here, and you get that demand surge in pricing, that doesn't hold up.
So when as an independent agent, are you in between the insured and the insurance companies after you've sold that policy?
Yeah, so that's, I think, another point that's worth mentioning. You know, we've heard a lot about the insurance adjusters and the carriers being overwhelmed and the adjusters being overwhelmed. We experience that every single day. I mean, you know, all of our homeowners agents, all of our commercial agents who have fires in these claims, we're talking to these agents or these adjusters, you know, on a daily or weekly basis. Me personally, I've got a dozen homes where I'm intimately involved with the adjusters because they're overwhelmed. They're not looking at things the way we're looking at them or the way that we see the contract work. So you know, in our case, we are that advocate and that go-between between the insurance company and the policyholder.
And then so we've heard in the earlier panel some examples of where they think the problems are, but from your point of view, what are the problems?
The biggest problem that we experience is just delays with communication. And that's simply because I'll use Nationwide, for example. We hit those guys very, very hard. We had a lot of claims with them. You know, they've got, you know, well over $1 billion in exposure just in these North Bay fires, and they don't have the people to adjust these claims. I mean, there's you know, I wouldn't surprise me if they're pushing 700-800 total loss claims. And you know, you've got a personal property adjuster, you've got a dwelling adjuster. For people that had cars burned, they've got an auto adjuster. So in the early stages of right after these fires, you had claimants having to deal with 3 adjusters for 3 specific lines of coverage. And what I saw is a lot of burnout. I mean, let's see, it was Mr. Khan. You know, he talked about, I think, a lot of the carriers just moving these adjusters out. What I see more is more turnover with adjusters, where they're just they're burning out and they're just saying this isn't worth the paycheck I'm getting.
So in addition to the adjuster issue, anything else that you would highlight as a significant problem in settling claims?
Not yet, but to Vice Mayor's Rogers' point, you know, he kept referencing that 18-month in the policy clause for the additional living expenses. I'm not sure whose policies those are, but most of the policies that we have 2 years, and then some of them have what they call reasonable expense. But to his point, 18 months isn't enough. 2 years isn't enough either with what we're dealing with. So I think that we're going to see, you know, we just passed the 1-year anniversary. We're going to see a lot of people in the next 6 months who either know they're not going to be in their homes or maybe haven't even started to rebuild their homes, and that's going to be a problem down the road.
Well, one last point, and then we'll continue with the other panelists. But take out the big eraser. Fires didn't happen, or put it a different way, we're starting over again, and you're selling your next policy to me. What have you learned that would instruct you to maybe hope that I do a smarter job in the insurance that I need? Or do you feel like you've been doing that? People have been getting the replacement costs and all the rest. Is everything really okay?
Everything is not really okay in our community and with the people that have lost the homes. I feel like things are fairly okay within our agency, but you know, what it really takes is, I mean, now that we've had this event, it doesn't matter if it's a homeowner or a commercial client, every policyholder we have it wants to review their limits. So this is something that we do on a regular basis with our clients. I can give you an idea. I've got a hotel owner that he had his hotel insured for $250 a foot. For 5, 6, 7 years, I've tried to get him to increase that. Wouldn't increase it. You know, we just increased it to pushing $600 a foot now because he's seen what happened. So it's that kind of, it's not going to happen to me thing, and but it does. I mean, the unthinkable happened, and that's what we're having to deal with right now. So I think communication with the agents and the policyholders, trying to explain to them when everything you own is gone, what's it going to take to go back to some sort of normalcy.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Dare. Mr. Dixon, you're up next. I understand you've, at the RAND Center for Catastrophic Risk Management and Compensation, you finished a study on climate change and their impact, and we look forward to your testimony this morning.
Sure. Good morning, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning. Yeah, today I'll give some of the findings and implications of the study we did as part of California's 4th Climate Change Assessment, and it was funded by the California Natural Resources Agency. So in this study, what did we do? We compared the insurance market outcomes, different measures of how the insurance market's performing, in zip codes with a high wildfire risk, with outcomes in zip codes with low wildfire risk. And so what did we find? And I can't go through all the findings, but I'll talk about a few most relevant to the hearing today. First, regarding the cost or the premiums for homeowners policies. We looked at the rate per $1,000 of coverage, and we found that it was substantially higher in zip codes with high risk, high wildfire risk. And, you know, you'd expect that. We also found that those rates per $1,000 of coverage have been increasing a lot faster in the high-risk zip codes over the last since 2007. So what we found was that the rates per $1,000 of coverage were 50% higher in the high-risk zip codes, and that between 2007 and 2014, they rose 12%. Compared to low-risk zip codes, where the rates per $1,000 coverage fell 12%. So you see, you know, the market adjusting and higher, as you'd expect, higher rates in the high-risk zip codes. Now, when we talk to the insurers about these findings, you know, they by and large believe that the differences between the high-risk and the low-risk areas do not fully reflect the actual risk difference between the high risk and the low risk areas, that there's some compression of the rate differences across high risk and low risk areas. We also talked to the California Department of Insurance about this, and their feeling was that they pointed out first that the rates are increasing a lot faster in the high risk areas, and that the insurers really have not provided sufficient evidence that greater risk difference, that rate differences are warranted between the two areas. The second area I wanted to talk about today was what we found out regarding the adequacy of coverage. And to look at that, we compared the amount of coverage using data reported to the Department of Insurance by insurers relative to the value of the structures by zip code. So it's kind of a ratio of coverage to insurable or replacement cost of the structure. And we found that in the low wildfire risk areas, that ratio is roughly 100%, so that the coverage amounts were comparable to the replacement amounts in the lower wildfire risk areas. And pointed out that doesn't include the extended coverage. That's just you know, the basic coverage A and coverage B on the policy. So while it's around 100%, that ratio is around 100% in the low-risk areas, it is lower in the high-risk areas. We found it was about 10 percentage point lower in the high-risk areas. So that gives you some indication that, and I'll come back to this in a minute, but that homeowners in high-risk areas tend to buy less coverage relative to the value of the home. To provide another perspective on this issue of coverage adequacy, we also collected data on a confidential basis from a number of insurers on the number or percentage of residential wildfire claims that paid at the policy limit. You know, that's another indication of, you know, how often people are bumping up against their coverage limits and having coverage problems. And we found that the insurers reported about 6% of claims paid at the policy limit. Now, that's not a high percentage, but, you know, a lot of claims are smoke claims, and, you know, they're not going to play at the policy limit. So we actually didn't have the data to look at what percent of total losses paid at the policy limit, but it's probably substantially higher. Okay, so we've talked about, heard already on the panel, a number of reasons that these, you know, coverage ratios may be low in the high-risk areas. One of which that, you know, it's a homeowner choice to some extent, and they're, you know, very price sensitive and tend to want to control the cost of coverage. And as Amy said, there's a lot of information uncertainty and lack of information on this whole process. Okay, so that's what we found in the coverage to value ratio. We also found in the high-risk areas that people tend to have higher deductibles. We didn't find that was a huge effect, but tend to be higher deductibles in the high-risk areas. So let me conclude by just making a few observations about our findings. First, you know, I think it's important that homeowner insurance premiums in California reflect the actual risk, and that property owners in high-risk areas are not cross-subsidized by property owners in low-risk areas. And there's a couple of reasons for this. These, you know, call these risk-based rates, and you know, the advantage of these risk-based rates is first that they create incentives to avoid building in the riskiest areas. Second, they can encourage mitigation by allowing premium reductions or deductions for risk mitigation measures. And third, you know, you could argue that those cross-subsidies between the low-risk areas and the high-risk areas of the state really are unfair to the low-risk areas. You know, why should people in, you know, some poorer urban areas be in effect cross-subsidizing the premiums in the high-risk areas? And if you go to risk-based rates, they're, you know, going to be expensive, or they already are expensive. And our work has found that with climate change, we should only expect that these rates to increase as wildfire risk increases due to the climate change. So these higher rates in the high-risk areas will undoubtedly create some affordability problems for certain households. But I think you know, my point is, and it's just a thought for, you know, how to proceed moving forward, that rather than, you know, we should be thinking as a state that rather than providing cross subsidies to, you know, to reduce rates for all homeowners in the high-risk areas, that we target those subsidies to the households that most need them. So, for example, in the National Flood Insurance Program, Congress has asked the National Flood Insurance Program to develop affordability programs, flood insurance affordability programs, that provide assistance to households, low-income, low-network households in, you know, high flood risk areas. And I think that's, you know, that's something to think about. You know, you always got to worry about the funding source for that and who's going to pay for that. But you know, I think we'd be better off as a state with risk-based rates, with targeted subsidies to the households that need them, as opposed to cross subsidies that make rates cheaper for all households in high-risk areas, many of which can be very wealthy. Regarding the adequacy of coverage, you know, these higher premiums we've talked about create, in the high-risk areas, create obvious incentives for policyholders to reduce the amount of coverage that they buy. And I think we've heard some of the reasons that lead policyholders to do that. And I do agree with what's been said in the panel, the importance of you know, reviewing that purchase process to make sure that policyholders fully understand, you know, the trade-offs of what they're choosing. You know, for a high-income household, you know, if they want to buy a low amount of coverage with a high deductible, fine. You know, we're not worried about them. But for lower-income households that may have less information and less, you know, savvy in the whole process, I think it's important to think about how we structure that process to, you know, fully communicate and provide the right incentives for all the parties to communicate the trade-offs between buying higher levels versus lower levels of coverage.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Dixon, for your wisdom. Finally, batting cleanup here on the panel, Mr. Frazier from the Personal Insurance Federation of California. Rex, thank you for being here and for your testimony this morning.
Thank you. The 2017 fire season was devastating, and for insurance industry professionals, the immediate aftermath was intense, with personnel relocating from other states to ensure immediate payment of customers' additional living expenses, and some agents helping customers while they had lost their own home. The 2017 fire losses wiped out 16 years of underwriting profits dating back to 2001. But importantly, there's no report of any insurer insolvency related to the fires at this point. Our members report that the vast majority of the claims, over 90%, are closed, but these are typically not going to be the total losses. They're more likely to be claims such as smoke claims. The remaining open claims are obviously more complicated total losses. In Northern California, claims managers report significant reconstruction cost increases following the fires. In Sonoma and Napa counties, a shortage of skilled labor is apparent, driving large price increases. Of particular note are reports of framing contractors attempting to name their price, raising the issue of behavior that's more than simply demand surge. That feedback is consistent with public reporting on de novo homes pulling out of an arrangement earlier this year to rebuild homes on a bulk basis in Sonoma County, and they specifically cited an inability to secure framers on a consistent basis. Customers have struggled with high-cost preliminary contractor estimates, the lacking sufficient detail for insurers to evaluate, leading to customer alarm about inadequate coverage. When insurers have pursued additional details, there are many instances where upgrades to the lost home were included in the estimate and had to be backed out, or certain categories such as wells and septic systems were bid as complete replacements without adequate investigation as to whether a more limited repair would be warranted. In such situations, many estimates have been eyebrow-raising, with estimates well above $600 per square foot, which claims professionals do help to reduce with a more investigation, trying to get well-documented bids. For policymakers concerned about the adequacy of structural insurance coverage, this is an important issue that the legislature considered after the Oakland Hills fires in 1991. At that time, residential property insurers typically offered a guaranteed replacement cost policy, where an insurer promised to rebuild the home no matter how much coverage that the customer had purchased. During those days, disputes ensued as to whether the customer was overinsured, because some customers obviously would attempt to press for lower coverage limits, knowing that the insurer would still be responsible for a complete rebuild regardless of the coverage purchased. Following Oakland Hills, the first elected insurance commissioner, John Garamendi, exerted tremendous pressure upon insurers to increase their payments well beyond their replacement cost estimates, which spurred the market to migrate away from guaranteed replacement cost policies. Oakland Senator Nick Petras responded with legislation explicitly allowing replacement cost coverage with a maximum dollar limit on structural repair, along with mandates for increased insurer explanation of coverages and disclosures about the risk both of underinsurance as well as demand surge following a widespread disaster. While there are some guaranteed replacement cost policies remaining in the market, the industry standard today is the less expensive option of replacement cost coverage with a maximum policy benefit, which has eliminated complaints about overinsurance, but has led some to worry about underinsurance. Dr. Dixon's climate change assessment calculates, for the first time I'm aware, a systematic measurement of underinsurance and whether it's pervasive in high-risk areas. And his study calculated that coverage levels between 93% and 104% of home reconstruction costs. And importantly, that measure did not include extended replacement cost features, which are widely available in the marketplace. Those data highlight insurer compliance with the California Department of Insurance regulations mandating the required elements of replacement cost estimates. with the goal of helping customers select appropriate protection for their property. While the California insurance industry is well capitalized, there are trends for policymakers to monitor. Regarding affordability, California's average homeowners insurance rate is just above or just below the average in the country, with hurricane-prone states such as Texas and Florida approximately double the national average. There's been a slow rise of homeowners insurance rates in high-risk areas. However, insurers still express concerns about rate inadequacy in the highest risk areas. Regarding availability, admitted market insurers still serve high-risk areas, but there has been a small but statistically significant decrease of 8% in their presence in the highest risk areas. We believe this decrease reflects both insurer solvency concerns, related both to avoiding overconcentration in high-risk areas, as well as gradually withdrawing from areas where insurers are not permitted by the state to charge adequate prices. Looking forward, we are concerned about several issues in California. As housing has expanded further into the forest, chaparral, and grassland areas where fires have not been permitted to burn, the risk of loss has increased considerably. Insurer rating plans have generally evolved to include significant discounts for fire-resilient building materials, particularly for roofing and siding. But California's newest building code is very strong, but the Tubbs fire burned even the newest homes at rates equivalent to older homes. Insurers do encourage site-specific defensible space as well as community-wide mitigation, but such worthwhile efforts do not stop a massive fire where embers can land from 2 or 3 miles away. We're hopeful that SB 901 will act as a first step towards significant fuel reduction, which is absolutely necessary given all the homes insured in the WUI area, but there's clearly much more needed in order to assure that insurance will remain available and affordable in every community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Appreciate your insight from the insurer's point of view, and I'm sure there'll be some follow-up questions. I want to invite my colleagues on the panel to ask questions, and start with Senator Dodd and then Senator Morlock. Assemblyman Gibson follow.
Yeah, Mr. Frazier, at the top of your presentation, you talked about, could you repeat it, that these fires wiped out profits from, what was the specific years?
Dating back to 2001, 16 years of insurer profits for the homeowners line of business.
And how does that happen when there's absolute liability and PG&E is picking up the cost with absolute liability? I understand you subrogate somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 65%, but I just don't understand how that wipes out the profits from all those years.
Well, we don't have any recovery at this point from a utility. This is money out the door, and we'll see what happens, but we don't know whether PG&E
that's kind of a Crimea River type of comment, if you will, when you know that you've gone back to these other wildfires that have been caused by utilities, and PG&E is paying the cost, or at least a subrogated cost. From what you've told me, this is somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 and 65%.
We don't know who's responsible for the Tubbs fire, and in the meantime, insurance companies adjust these claims. So I'm just reporting the claims experience that we have. If that's subsequently reduced, then those numbers will change, but that's the number we currently have.
Right. I just wanted to add some daylight to that that's not necessarily the way it's going to be, and it's not the way it's gone in the past where there has been a utility-caused fire. I respect the fact
yeah, when there's been a utility-caused fire, I do want to emphasize, though, that utility-caused fires are the vast minority of fires. Generally, 10% or less of fires are related to utilities. Insurance companies pay for all the fires, and if a utility or some other third party causes a fire, then there's an opportunity for subrogation. But it's typically not a utility fire.
Well, I respect that, but the subject of today's panel, of course, 100% of them were utility-caused fires. We have not heard about the Tubbs fire yet. I respect that, but it's certainly not going to be zero. I mean,
well, for certain, yeah.
Yeah. So it seems to me that with those type of subrogation, I'm just not sure. I think there needs to be some sort of investigation in terms of how those rates are established, particularly when you are subrogating, from the utility companies.
Well, we're subject to extensive state regulation by the Department of Insurance on rates, and no insurance company is permitted to either increase or decrease its rates without prior approval of the Department of Insurance. So it's not as if an insurance company just makes this up. They have extensive dialogue and must prove a tremendous amount to the Department of Insurance, and that is, in the best case scenario, 3 or 4 months, and it's not uncommon for a rate filing to exceed a year. So rates are not established casually, and believe me, the Department of Insurance staff, they're extremely experienced. I worked with them for 6 years. They know this rating structure quite expertly, and in my view, do adequately safeguard consumer interests.
Thank you. Follow up, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, sure.
Chairs. One of my experiences in trying to get tough legislation through this year after the wildfires, and I do want to thank the chairs and for their putting up with me and others, because it was a tough time for the rest of the panel, and I think also for Mr. Frazier. For me, it seemed like, with all the evidence pointing to things that need to happen, like the insurance companies, for example, voluntarily came up with 70% of contents without inventory. Voluntarily, most of them. But yet, when we tried to get more for our constituents, either past or future, there was no offer even close to that, even when it was a wildfire, natural disaster, governor-declared disaster. We had some other legislation, which I won't go into, but it seems to me, and insurance committee members that are here, this is not, well, I guess it's just an observation. We sit there on the dais as committee members, and then the insurance industry comes up and says, oh, if you do this, then your rates, everybody's rates in the entire state of California is going to go up. Okay, nobody wants that. I think that's a condition that we're all concerned about, whether it's PG&E on power rates, or whether it's insurance rates, or any of the type of things that we regulate. But then there's also, not only will the rates go up for everybody, but we just might move out of the California market. And we're just not going to insure there, or we'll pull out of the wildland fire and we'll stay in other areas but not do it. I guess to the panel, how do we as legislators, or how do committee members, particularly when we have the Department of Insurance opining, I want to use BS, I guess I can do that. I don't think they use those words, but in essence, they're saying, no, that's not correct. Look at, the numerator is like 5,000. The denominator is 12 million policyholders. That is not correct. And then we have, others that come in and weigh in on both sides. But then, I guess what I'm looking for is some direction for committee members that serve on the insurance committee. What are other factors to mitigate these type of things, to get important legislation through to help our constituents? And this is all we were trying to do from the very, very beginning. And to me, it was very, very disappointing, but I certainly respect my colleagues that serve on the insurance committee, because that is not an outcome that's acceptable for 40 million Californians or 12 million policyholders. So I'd like some direction from the other panelists.
Ms. Bach, you want to begin?
Thank you, yes. So this does kind of drill down. There's just a finite number of areas where voluntary enhancements from Rex's clients, from the carriers, make a huge amount of difference. And I have the same frustration that you have in terms of, well, we heard, okay, 6% of claims paid at policy limit. We have a very small subset, okay, of of the insurer's clients that we are trying to help, right? There's a very small universe of people who need every dollar available under their policy in order to get back on their feet, okay? So we are here to focus on those people, right? So we have the fact that a lot of people, 2/3 of the people don't have enough coverage overall. We have a real serious marketplace problem, okay? Then we have the proof requirements. We know that a number of insurers did, in fact, step up voluntarily, and so to do 70, and some did 100 payout on contents without itemization. But same frustration I had. But then you say, well, why can't we just make that a law? No, 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 no. And then we have this whole argument about that I can't get away from the logic because so many of the thousands of fire survivors I've worked with see it the same way I see it, which is if I paid a premium for $280,000 in contents coverage and everything I have is gone, why aren't I getting a check for $280,000? So I do think we need to really have a sit down, and not with a lot of, love the media, but maybe, closed door, little more free talking, to get some of the insurance executives to say what they can do. Because of course, when we had Steve Poizner negotiated the voluntary claims reforms, Dave Jones has kept those in place after every disaster. So we know that the carriers can do some things to make their customers' lives better, but also to do what we all want them to do, which is pay as much as you can, as quickly as you can, so people are in a position to make decisions, and you don't have this whole ripple effect of why Keith Woods and I are constantly on panels together trying to figure out, why do we only have 32 homes rebuilt, and it's been over a year. So there are some low-hanging fruit, I think, with expanding the voluntary claims reforms. Yeah, we couldn't get it through in legislation, but we've got a big running start here. And again, I mean, the fact that the insurers, that Rex is saying that I thought I heard you say investment income as opposed to profits were wiped out, but regardless, if in fact, this was an expensive, obviously, fire. But again, you have to look at it in the context of their broader customer base. This is still a very small percentage of their customers. So I think, again, wildfire total losses are different. They need to be treated different. They need to be adjusted differently. All this depreciation and holdbacks of actual cash value, I understand why insurers do that in the day-to-day claims. But in a situation like this, it's just cruel. So I know we can do better.
Well, I think the challenge for insurance carriers try to predict losses, right? They've got teams of actuaries to try to figure this stuff out. The models are all blown to hell. I mean, nobody thought Coffee Park would burn. Coffee Park is not a wildfire zone. So I think the way that the insurance carriers have looked at these modelings and tried to price their business, some of that stuff's going out the window. I mean, we're having hurricanes go places they haven't gone. We're having tornadoes in places they haven't gone. So, the fortunate thing for this terrible event that we had is that because it was a fire, it was largely an insured event. It wasn't like an earthquake or a flood where those things aren't insured. But I don't know that the insurance carriers have a way to price policies with models because the models aren't holding up the way that they have. So I don't know how they do that, but it is a difficult thing for them to do when you have Coffee Park burn, for example.
Yeah, my angle on that, looking at that, is the availability of insurance in the high wildfire risk areas. And sort of what we found was that the admitted market is, is nervous about those areas, that the market share of the surplus lines carriers is increasing, the market share of the FAIR plan is increasing in those high-risk areas, and insurers, what do they point to? Well, they point to that we're not able to charge the rates that we need to stay in those areas. That's one thing that you hear, and then there's also some other issues regarding reinsurance and other things that they bring up. But as far as making the market function well. I think there are some indicators that we got issues in the high wildfire risk areas that we need to be thinking about moving forward.
Yeah, as to the insurance industry response, I'm not aware that the general insurance industry line was you better do what we want or we're going to extort you and leave your communities. I don't believe that's what we said this year, and I don't believe that's what we're saying moving forward. What I tried to point out is that there's some cracks in the system in the highest risk areas. That's what Dr. Dixon's research showed. But the admitted market is still serving every community, but there's a push and pull. Every time that, let's say, Amy says, well, just pay coverage limits without looking at actual loss. Okay, rates are based upon historical losses, and that's the notion that we just would require payment at policy limits without a documented loss, that's clearly going to increase claims payout. Okay, as a public policy, you might decide you want to do that. Then will you also be advocating with us at the Department of Insurance to help us get increased rates so that we're able to pay for those losses? I doubt it. So there's always pressure on insurance companies. You must say yes to every application. You must renew everyone, but we're not going to let you charge adequate rates for the business you're going to do. And by the way, ask fewer questions when you're paying claims and make sure you're more generous. Those all together make it difficult to do business in every community. So we're trying our best to figure out how to serve in every community because insurance agents are in every community. They're on every Little League fence, just like everyone else who talked with local knowledge. Insurance professionals are there as well. California is an incredibly difficult place to do business, but yet our rates here in California are below the national average. They're half of what the average is in Texas and in Florida. So it's not as if insurance companies are saying we need crazy rates and if you don't do it, bad things are going to happen. But we did negotiate with the legislature 11 bills to completion this year, and each one added incremental costs to the cost of doing business in California, and we're going to have to recover those in rates as well. So it's not as if we just sat back and said no. We worked truly hard for 7 months trying to figure out the best compromise so that we could be good participants in the California business community and all communities for that matter. And that's what we want. We're here to problem solve with you and acknowledge if we have problems, we want to hear about it and we want to work with you to address them. And we're not afraid to be told we should do better. We're open for that. But the notion that there's just some sort of mass problem, there's so many customers who don't come to Amy's community forums because they don't have problems. There's so many people who have wonderful claims experiences, but they're not the ones who are going to come and fill out a survey asking if you have a problem.
Okay, we have members who have more questions to be asked, and our time is running a little short. I have Senator Morlock, Assemblymember Gibson, Senator Lara, Assemblymember Grayson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dare and Mr. Dixon, you brought up the consumer choice aspect of this whole process. And so when a consumer wants to protect an asset like a car, they can buy liability insurance or they could get full coverage. They make choices, right?
Correct.
So when it comes to purchasing a home, you want to protect it. It's a major investment, but you want to protect it also for collateral purposes because you borrowed a significant amount of money from a lender to buy that home. And I don't have the mortgage industry at the table, but aren't they a major force in saying you're mandated to buy this insurance?
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of the education that we have to do with our clients. I mean, oftentimes we get information from a client saying, I'm buying this house, here's what it's going to cost, my loan is $533,000. Now, that house might be worth $800,000 or might cost $800,000 to replace it. So that's where, the consumers don't necessarily always think, I need to insure it for the worst possible scenario. I just need to insure it for what my loan is. But, again, if that house burns, if everything in that house burns, what is it going to take to rebuild it? That's the education process that we have to do with the clients and help them understand and have them help us understand what their total loss scenario would look like so that they can we can provide adequate coverage for that.
So the Vice Mayor pointed out that we could expect a number of lots being sold. Is that because of bank transactions where they just finally say, I can't make the monthly payment, I got to just cut?
What we're seeing a lot of the lenders keeping their relationship with their borrowers. I mean, in a perfect world, the lender sticks with them, the insurance company sticks with them through that rebuild process. The insurer insures the new house, the lender has the same loan or works with them on a construction loan. That's in a perfect world. But most of the lots that we see going up for sale are people that have either just moved out of the area or simply bought another house, and they're, they were on the fence if they were going to rebuild or not, but they've decided to just put the lot on the market and sell it.
Okay, so I just look at mortgage companies as a force that isn't present in the room. Are there any other forces that are dictating what a purchaser should be looking at for the amount of coverage they're
not really, and I think it's important to point out too, the mortgage companies only want to protect their loan value. They don't care if the homeowner is made whole in a loss situation, as long as their loan is protected. So,
I believe that some, though, will require that the policy be a replacement value policy, not
Sure.
an ACV. I have seen that nuance.
Right. Senator Morlock?
Okay, I just want to make sure that we've got some force, somebody's telling us to buy a certain amount, and then we can go from a Yugo to a Cadillac, our choice.
correct.
I mean, and then, roughly a third of homes don't have mortgages, so,
Yeah.
in that you don't have that pressure in that case.
Right, and we are seeing, my organization has definitely seen an increase in the number of disaster victims who have no insurance in the last few years. But I mean, if I can take 1 minute, I am not here to demonize your clients. In fact, I want your clients to thrive and be healthy. I think certainly, obviously, there are many people who have come out fine, but we're here to solve the problems of the people who didn't come out fine and have been coming to elected officials for help. And our organization from day one has been telling people, don't be penny wise and pound foolish when you're insuring your biggest asset. The problem, and we have been fully anticipating that rates are going to be going up given climate change. It's pretty obvious. We work in other states where there are hurricanes, so we've seen it. Yes, the California market is still very healthy. We want to keep it healthy. But I think, what clearly the competition between insurers for clients is part of what's fueling this underinsurance problem, is that, I'd have had a lot of insurance execs point the fingers at a competitor and say, well, they lowball the estimate, so I got to lowball the estimate if I want to get that client. And yeah, I don't know very many consumers that are super keen to pay any more for insurance than they absolutely feel like they have to. But the reality is that you just have an expectation in the public's mind that the insurance professionals know their job and they're going to tell them. So every single one of these people that have been coming to our overflow, 300 people at a shot workshops, almost every one of them will tell you, and they will take a lie detector test and tell you this, I asked if I had full coverage and I was told my coverage was adequate. And I've seen the communication between the consumers and their insurance companies and agents, and they were lulled into a false sense of security, and we just have to break that.
Okay. I'm going to let Mr. Frazier,
Sorry,
quick
I just can't
response.
let that-
Yeah.
I can't let that stand. Am I on? Yeah. If indeed an agent would say, I'm guaranteeing the adequacy of coverage, the policy is converted to a guaranteed replacement cost policy by virtue of that representation. So the notion that someone would be lulled into a false sense of security by a misrepresentation and have no recourse, that's simply not the law in California. You have recourse, and that company is going to pay that claim. Yeah. Now, what I see happen is the Department of Insurance will examine situations where Company A would give a replacement cost estimate of a certain amount, and there's no doubt what they're calculating as their estimate, but let's say it's lower than Company B coming along and saying, well, you really need to go higher in your coverage. And the Department of Insurance, as long as the the company has been forthright in saying this is what we calculate your estimate as. If oftentimes, if the second agent can't come along and say, no, that's not enough, you really need to pay more and get this, then the law does not prevent the person from choosing the lower amount of coverage as long as there's been adequate disclosure. Because in the end, it's the customer's choice as to how much insurance they want to purchase. And so there is no law that says an insurance agent, for instance, has a fiduciary duty to put the customer's interests first in such a way that they're responsible for anything that goes wrong afterward. That's simply not the law.
Okay, very good. So, Senator, you very good. I have Assembly Member Gibson.
Thank you very much. My mother always said, rather have insurance than not need it than need it and not have it. And so my question is what is the likelihood insurance companies will stop writing and renewing homeowners policies in areas of high fire risk moving forward? So that's my question, and that's some of the concerns in which people have conveyed messages to me. That's my first question.
Sure. Assemblymember Gibson, our hope is that the market will attract new entrants and make sure that, there are some companies who they look at a community and feel overexposed, and because of geographic overconcentration, they start expressing reticence to accept every application. And the hope is that the market is healthy enough to attract new entrants into the marketplace. And in fact, Dr. Dixon's study shows that in the very highest risk zip codes, there is a higher than average number of carriers competing in those areas. So my hope is that the market will stay healthy, but what we advocated all year was let's not create a crisis that doesn't exist with legislation that, that triggers problems. And so we feel like we were able to reach accommodations on those 11 bills that maximize the likelihood of companies staying in the highest risk zip codes, but obviously I can't provide any guarantees for any specific companies.
One other follow-up question?
Yes, I'll just add real quick on that. We see certain carriers, I mean, in my company, we've got about 1,000 re-inspections that are being triggered by wildfire or brush concerns by insurance companies. Some of those were the clients are able to mitigate it, some they're not, but as some of those clients or carriers are wanting to lessen their exposure in certain wildfire areas, we still are seeing new carriers that are coming in and writing. So we're not seeing a problem with capacity from that issue.
Three quickies. One, the one good thing, AB 2229, that requires insurers to disclose discounts is a good step in the right direction. Before last year's fire season, I did a ride-along in Moraga, your district, with a fire marshal to a home where Allstate had said, if you don't, make this a less brush heavy around your house, we're going to drop you. So there's a lot we can do with mitigation. And the last point, but we couldn't get a lot of cooperation from your team on a legislative kind of standard. So we don't really have that at all in terms of what kind of incentives could homeowners get to make their homes less likely to burn, that kind of thing. Last point, and there is an insurance finder tool that our organization has pioneered. So your constituents need not panic because there are definitely lots of options. Very last. In changing a policy, adding an extended replacement cost provision to a home policy that doubles the coverage, it really is not that expensive. So if it isn't that hard on the homeowner to get better coverage if they're working with a really good agent. So it just makes all the difference.
Just short, Dr. Dixon.
Yeah, just let me say just a couple more things on your point is that, so we did find that the market share of the surplus lines carriers is increasing a little bit in these high-risk areas. And, those aren't as thoroughly regulated by the California Department of Insurance as the admitted carriers. So, that's something to think about. And the other thing we did find is that in certain areas, the FAIR plan is increasing their market share. So that tells you that there is some, concerns by the admitted market. Even though there's turnovers and there's new entrants, overall there is some concerns. And, we're nowhere near this in California, but, you always have to keep an eye on the market share of the FAIR plan. We don't want it to turn into something like happened in Florida, where you had a massive Fair Plan in effect come into being and all the problems that caused.
Assemblymember Gibson, all good?
You know, I'll ask them offline because I know for the interest of time.
Very
I'm
good.
good.
Senator
Thank you.
Lara.
Thank you. I think I should just ask all my questions and then see if we can answer, because I want to make sure I have roughly 4 questions for different people. So one for Mr. Dixon, we keep talking about high-risk areas. What does that mean now? We have no idea what a high-risk area is going to be next year or the year before. So, and this given changing climate, and we've obviously worked on legislation to try to figure out how we can do new modeling to be able to figure out what is a high-risk area now. Because clearly what was a high-risk area before is clearly not now,
Right.
or is something different. So for Ms. Bach, what role should local governments play in siting new housing? And how do we figure out where should local governments focus on in terms of building in sensitive areas? Want to get your thoughts on that. The other thing is, the other question I have too for Mr. Frazier is the fact that the majority of the legislation that we've passed seems to really target this issue prospectively. Have we done enough for people who have actually survived these disasters now? And what can we do? The other thing is, as you know, we passed legislation to expand protections to 12 months for people who haven't lost their home. We've also helped to collect new data when it comes to fire risk assessment. If that data comes back saying that this fire risk data is being used to deny people access to insurance, will you commit to helping us address this issue?
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, I'll start. So, as far as high-risk areas, really good question. What we did is we looked at wildfire models and looked at the percent of acres in each zip code that are expected to burn, and then combined that with estimates of where the population is to determine the expected average number of structures expected to burn in any given year. So that was the measure of high risk versus low risk. And you can think of the low risk ones, and things are changing. But in very densely urban areas, wildfires not a risk, and the issues related to embers and all that. So those are our low risk areas, and the higher ones are in the the wildland urban interface. The other part of our study was to look at how those high wildfire risk areas are expected to change with climate change through the end of the century, using the different projections. And we found, like in the areas above the Sierra of Sacramento and the Sierra foothills, that the expected number, percent of acres to burn is expected to double by mid-century and then double again by the end of the century. So those are, big numbers, and, this is an ongoing major issue for the state to deal with. And just as a side, also points out the importance of efforts to control carbon emissions that can reduce that effect.
Ms. Bach?
So on what can local officials do, let's start there. Certainly enforce building codes, which is easier said than done. I know, Sonoma County and Napa County, there's a little bit of a conflict. You want to help people rebuild, but you also want to make sure that they build safe. And so, we do need to enforce our building codes. Limit development in new construction in sensitive areas. I mean, I think to a degree the insurance market does help by appropriately charging for people who are building in higher risk. We just want to make sure that they're not that they're doing it fairly. But we do have a pretty hardy regulatory regime. Insurers can come in anytime they want for a rate increase request. So it's not like there's some cap there. The two issues that I know we're going to need more cooperation from insurers on, ALE in this area, additional living expense. A lot of people are very nervous that even their 24 months isn't gonna get them. They're not going to be able to be back home. And I think we're going to call on insurers to work with their customers. And just to refute Rex's, it's a casual idea that you have a little bit of proof that you were misled and poof, your policy gets reformed. It's not like that at all. People who people have to get evidence that there was this communication. People hardly ever do. So the majority of people who actually get their policies reformed to be where they should have been, there are a very small subset of people who miraculously saved these texts and these letters. Most people who are in the he said, she said do not get their policies.
I want to keep this response to Senator Lara's question.
Sure, sure. So yeah, so extending ALE for another 6 months if people can show that they used due diligence and couldn't get back in. And then we still have a big issue coming down the pike with the debris removal bills.
Okay, Mr. Frazier.
Senator Lara, as to retroactive impact, we saw a lot of those bills this year. We certainly believe that prices are based on what the law is at the time you make your rate filing. And when the legislature changes the rules to, let's say, add additional policy expenses that we would pay at that point, once we reflect those, then we'll come to the Department of Insurance and ask for rate increases to cover those additional costs. But we haven't been able to get comfortable with the notion that when our rates are built on a certain body of law, the legislature would come along and then retroactively change the law to add costs without that being included in the rate filing. As to underwriting, underwriting is really a tool that insurers must use when they are not able to get adequate rate. When a rate plan approved by the Department of Insurance in a certain area, let's say, wouldn't allow the insurance company to get an adequate price. You can't continue just to operate as business as usual, so you start using underwriting tools to deny applications or possibly non-renew to make sure that that lower risk matches the inadequate pricing of the area. That's the struggle that companies face, and obviously with rate adequacy, it's a lot easier to write in every community where the only thing you're managing at that point is geographic overconcentration. So.
Good. Senator Lara, are you good? Thanks for those good questions. Assemblymember Grayson.
Thank you, Senator and Chair. I understand the purpose and for this hearing and while we're here. However, just as a reminder, the wildfires that we have can't be siloed into just a conflict between homeowners and policy providers. There are so many other things that we need to do on a state level with fire management as far as forest management and land management, as well as the local policies. So I don't need an answer today. What I will do is throw this out and share with you the interest that I have in my office, what we'll be pursuing. And what was mentioned by Ms. Bach was that we have the laws, we're just not enforcing them. And some of the things that you had mentioned about when we had the disaster, you had a table out there. That's great and that's fantastic, but not all the victims could make it to your table. And so I think the one thing I'm really interested in is making sure that prior to a disaster, policyholders, property owners are aware of their rights and they are aware of resources that are available for them, whether it be FEMA or anything else prior to, rather than waiting till after the disaster and things are a bit awry. The other thing I'm really, really focused and interested in, and possibly if you did want to respond, Mr. Dare, on how often are policies reviewed and how often are they updated to assure that someone has adequate insurance?
I would say on our commercial policies, I mean, we're reviewing those limits with those policyholders on an annual basis. On the homeowners policies, you know, our policy is to do a comprehensive review every 3 years. You know, some of the clients get a review more often than that based on their need. You know, a lot of times they're asking for that, but you know, I would say every 3 years is, you know, we're sitting down and we're asking our agents to sit down and look at these limits with
So possibly I need to seek some help then, because I've had one for 15 years and never had a.
I would be reviewing that.
Contact.
Yeah. A better independent agent.
Grayson, I do. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to draw to your attention AB 1797, which was passed this year to require a provision of a replacement cost estimate every 2 years.
Under the law that the governor signed.
Just
I
as a-
have a couple of other
I'm
members
sorry,
who have
so
questions. So Assemblymember Grayson, you're good? Okay, Senator Galgiani and then Assemblymember Cooley.
Senator Morlock sort of touched in this space a little bit earlier, and I wanted to throw this out specifically to Mr. Frazier and the builder community and the mortgage community. My district happens to be in a flood, a highly exposed flood area. I have 1,700 miles of delta levees that go from San Joaquin County up to Sacramento County, and 20 years ago we had a massive flood and massive damage. And since that time, there has been legislation that has been very controversial, but it set up new standards for 200-year floodplain areas, whereby any builder going into an area, into one of those designated areas, must meet certain higher standards before they can get approved to be able to build. And there's a timeline that's attached with it. You might remember it. It was SB 5 by Senator Machado. And again, it's been controversial because there have been some problems with it, and it gets difficult when you're trying to tell property owners what they can do and can't do with their property. But CAL FIRE does keep maps of they call them their state responsibility areas, their SRAs, of the very high-risk fire areas. And I know that with the constituents in my district, they didn't set out to intentionally buy a home in a floodplain. They trusted others who encouraged them to buy, whether it's the builder, the real estate agents, the insurer, whoever it would be. They just trusted that, well, this is on the market and I'm going to buy this home because I want it. I'm just wondering if there's been any thought to having discussion among the insurance industry, the building industry, the mortgage industry, about taking a look at these state responsibility areas and really looking at, do we need to set up some requirements similar to what's been done for flood areas that actually FEMA was involved with as well? Is that a conversation that's been started or thought about?
I'm not aware of that, where there would be, just so I understand, that there would be some enforcer, whether it would be, I guess, some state agency that would mandate the purchase of insurance for certain folks. Is that because certainly in Lake County, it was a great example where there are a lot of folks who they inherited their homes, they were paid off, there's no bank there requiring a note. And all of a sudden you have a tremendous, way too many folks who just completely lost their home with no insurance.
Maybe I understood it to ask an equivalent of the flood mapping program for fire risk. Okay.
Yes.
And so if you don't mind, I don't think we have that. We do have, in fact, when I had a note here to ask Lloyd, is there a uniform standard for high risk? I think Senator Lara actually asked sort of the same question. And I just wanted a point of information to share if all of you didn't know this, but the governor created a task force on tree mortality a number of years ago, right? And they were looking at what are we going to do with the 100 million dead trees from the bark beetle infestation. But then then because in a lot of these areas, the insurance market was changing and people were getting non-renewed. One of your colleagues actually got non-renewed. And so an insurance subgroup grew out of the tree mortality task force. It's kind of, I don't know, moribund, but it's sort of on hold right now. And I just spoke to a supervisor down in Maricopa County about whether we should try to renew it, because the focus there was, wouldn't it be great in terms of developing mitigation standards, discount support, and best practices with forestry management, all that we continue this work with insurers, with stakeholders, with CAL FIRE, because there really isn't a standard. I don't believe there's a high risk classification that everyone would agree with. I think the insurers, probably a lot of them, use their own way of defining, and I know that we have a long way to go to figure out what's effective in saving homes in the aftermath of a wildfire compared to flood. We have there's a lot more strategies you can use that we know work. With wildfire, we still have, the screens to keep embers from flying back in. You can do that. Roof vent screens. You've got the the foam and of course, replacing roofs. But there's still, we still have some work to do. But I think trying to get some clearer standards, I think a mapping idea is great, if you can figure out who's going to pay for it and do it.
Yeah, there are maps that are out there. The CPUC has been working for, I believe, the last 10 years on updating their maps. CAL FIRE has been intimately involved in that. I think the criticism you'll hear of the existing high fire severity maps is that it lacks wind data, which has been terribly, there's never been the computing power in order to put that together. But there are startups in Silicon Valley that are trying to build a better mousetrap, and those models will get better over time, and the CPUC certainly is pressing for that.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Cooley.
On that last question, a general question is, how do you feel the residential property insurance disclosure form is working? That, of course, came out of the Oakland Hills fire. Nick Petras lost his home in his 3,000-volume library. I think Senator Nick Petras lost a home in Oakland Hills. We have the disclosure form, which is actually where in the code we talk about demand surge, changes in building codes. It deals with actual cash value coverage, replacement cost coverage. So there is a disclosure that people are supposed to get that tells them what type of coverage they've got, which deals with the adequacy issue. If people are not buying insurance, they're actually obviously not getting that disclosure, which would start educating them. But just any comments about how that scheme of the coverage disclosure that is currently a part of our law, and then related to it, the Bill of Rights. Any updated comments on those?
My only comment on that is I just don't think people were reading it. I mean, I'd guess 80% of the people that lost homes or had smoke damage claims in this event didn't have a clue what their coverage was. So it's great to have these things, but if it's not, if people aren't taking the initiative to read what they're buying and trying to understand it, that's a tough one.
To add to that, I think I'm a lawyer, so I've looked at the history of the law, and you gave some good in the background materials for the hearing of the Everett case, and which basically has been, in my opinion, looking at this for a long time. I think the fact that ultimately the insurer and its producer do not have a duty to adequately insure. At least the courts have not wanted to pin that on the seller to say, okay, it's not enough just to sell somebody insurance. You got to sell them insurance that's tailored for their property. The courts have not wanted to go there, but I honestly think that the fact that they haven't gone there is why the problem keeps going. Because I think as long as you've got this competition and, between carriers, you're gonna, and because total losses are rare, as long as the carrier and its agents know that they are not going to be held liable unless the person has this incredible quantum of proof, which hardly anyone has, that they were misinformed, most of the time the customer loses. So I think that is a reality. I know this body is not enthusiastic about creating a new cause of action, but I have to say we've tried almost everything else.
Okay. Assemblymember Cooley, you're good?
I'm good.
All right, unless there's further questions from the panel, I want to thank them for coming and sharing their thoughts and insights. We're going to move next to public comment. And so if you're here and would like to, we have a podium to the right. If you'd hear and you'd like to provide some public comment to our joint committee, I'd like to invite you to come stand up behind the podium, and we'll give each of members of the public that opportunity to share their thoughts as the panel finishes up here. Okay, so for public comment, I'd like to ask you to try to, if you let us know who you are, we'd appreciate that. And I'd like to ask you to consolidate your comments, if you can, into a minute or two, so we can have the time for everyone to provide their testimony to us this morning. So welcome. Come on up and ready
to go?
Yeah, we are ready to go.
Ladies and gentlemen, Thank you for having this meeting, by the way. It's very informative. My wife and I lost our home on the Tubbs Fire, October 9th, 2017. We lost our home, our personal property, and our proof of life. It took us a month or two, certainly after Christmas, but to gather ourselves up to purchase clothes, shoes, pots and pans, things to live on, and find a place to live. Soon after Christmas, we realized through talking with neighbors, lawyers, friends of mine, contractors, and others, and also attending the United Policyholder meetings, and thank you very much to Amy Bach for that, we realized that we were underinsured. But we weren't just underinsured, we were severely underinsured. We had just purchased our house in August of 2015 in the Fountain Grove area of Santa Rosa. Now, you would think you would be properly insured just be 2 years before the fire, but we weren't. I had to do some research, and I've done a lot of it through a lot of sources. One of those was the North Bay Builders Exchange, realizing that the per square foot building cost in my neighborhood and area at the time of the fire was approximately $450 to $475 per square foot. You've heard higher figures of that today, going above $600 a square foot, and I believe that's what we are right now. That cost is going to go up. My house was insured for $216 per square foot. I don't know how that happened. We had just purchased our house 2 years before the fire. I talked to my agent, who we're not talking right now because he's abandoned me twice in the last year because he thinks he's going to get sued, so he stopped talking to me. But when we were talking, I asked him, how come we're so underinsured? He thought we were properly insured. I told him that we were not. He said that the insurance companies underinsure you on purpose. I said, why did they do that? That defeats its purpose, because if they really underinsure you, there'd be a lot of lawsuits, and they're going to have to pay over and above the policy. He says, no, it doesn't work that way. They underinsure you because 90% of the people will not fight them, will not resist them. They will walk. They will give up. I'm here today to tell you that I'm not giving up. We have gone through Ms. Bach's organization and learning through her meetings that there is a process called the reformation process. It's a reformation of policy and coverages. This is a policy, or this is an action that the insurance companies can take to award you your coverages above and beyond your policy limits if they find that they have made mistakes and want to own up to their responsibilities. I've been through that process since early March. In May, they admitted that there was an agent bidding error, whatever that means. It means that the agent made a mistake. He didn't come out to my house and measure the square footage, although he was out there socially and he saw many things. He even helped me put up the outside backyard structure. He knew what we had. He saw what we had, and he saw about $200,000 of just material cost of improvements on that house for the 2 years that I owned the house that I worked on every single day. I also found out that he was insured for approximately $350 to $400 a square foot in his neighborhood, which was less than mine. We went through the reformation process. They admitted their mistake. They added to my coverage A, which is your building cost, of $100,000. They were still approximately $600,000 short of what it was going to take to rebuild. At that time, I told them it was wholly inadequate and that I would prove to them through a builder or two that I would get those contractors' estimates to them, and I would show you the real cost of what it's going to cost to rebuild my home in Santa Rosa. That was done by a very good and knowledgeable professional through a couple of builders. It's going to cost about approximately $1.3 to $1.5 million to replace my house. My house would have sold for approximately $900,000 at the time of the fire. I had approximately $500,000 of personal property, which my wife and I inventoried for about 2 months, every single day, over 1,100 lines in an Excel program. They just turned down my second request. They had a first request, which we call a mini reformation, but they just turned me down last Thursday on the second request for a proper and true reformation of policies, because this is a slam dunk. I've had lawyers beg me for them to represent me on contingency, because this is such a slam dunk. I told Farmers Insurance for months and months, please don't be penny wise and pound foolish. I do not want to sue you. I do not want to go through that. It's going to take a long time. Right now, my wife and I are refugees in the North Bay. We've lost our jobs, and this insurance thing and this fire is a full-time job, and that's what I've been doing for a year. So they turned me down last Thursday. I signed the contracts on Saturday to sue them. I have a couple of very good lawyers, and hopefully that'll turn out well. But we're in a protracted battle. So I wanted to explain today from a fire casualty. I won't call myself a victim because I am not part of the 90% that's not going to fight. I'm a part of the 10 that's going to fight. I'm going to win. And I intend to go to the media after this, too. It's a part of my campaign now. I'm a former Marine officer. I figure I'm in a battle. I'm stepping over the line of departure, and I'm in a fight. And it's going to be a comprehensive fight.
Thank
So,
you.
One more thing.
Up,
one more
please.
thing. I'm not just here to state this. I'm going to ask you something. So I'm in a lawsuit now. I am going to be going to the media. But we have been talking about the additional living expense, the loss of use, which is a 2-year benefit that the insurance companies provide. We do need an extension on that. I've asked my insurance company to extend that to a 3rd year or maybe more because this entire last year has been a waste of time. It hasn't been a waste of time. It's been a loss of time. We still haven't started yet. We cannot build our house. We cannot buy a lot and build our house, and we cannot buy a house in our area. We are right now in refugee status, fighting the insurance companies. That's what I wanted to say today. And if you can add the ALE of anything, but also take note, I am just one of many. Many of my friends are also having to sue. My next-door neighbor, another person here in Napa. We are going through it, which we should not have had to. And by the way, how did my insurance agent insure me for $216 a square foot 2 years before the fire, when the actual building cost was $450 to $475 a square foot? How did that happen? Because one more thing, I'm a guy that was working 3 jobs out there. I was working 12, 14 hours a day. When the bills came in, I wrote the damn checks. I'm not necessarily looking at the fine print, because when he told me I was properly insured and everything was going to be good to go if there was a fire, I trusted him. I did not know what the per square foot building cost was in my neighborhood or area. And you know what? Most of us don't. And this is for the last thing. These gentlemen have talked about what the amount of people, what they're doing on building out there. It was 70 to 80% of the people in the Tubbs fire are underinsured. That's what's really going on. Talk to them. They're trying to work out their claims. They're trying to get their money. They can't do anything until they figure out what they have to work with. So we're all on hold because of the insurance company. And here's the statement. We can handle the fire. We can handle the loss. We can't handle the insurance company. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, and I don't know how I'm going to follow that, but I am Stacy Heaton from the Rural County Representatives of California, RCRC. We represent 36 rural counties statewide, including Napa, Mendocino, Lake, and now Sonoma. They just joined us in September. We've been hearing a lot of stories like the previous commenter over the last, not just since the 2017 fires, but also on previous fires such as the Valley Fire in Lake County and the Butte Fire in Calaveras and Amador counties. And now we've had the Carr Fire that destroyed more than 1,000 homes up in the Shasta County area, as well as the Ferguson Fire and the Mendocino Complex Fire this year. So these fires aren't going away. These high-severity fires aren't going away. And we also have 129 million dead trees still down in the southern and central Sierras, where we're hearing a lot of insurance issues coming from those homeowners that are being canceled and non-renewed. And we've been hearing those stories for a few years now. And we realize this is a very complex issue. We've been spending the last few years in conversations with the insurance industry, both independently and through the state's tree mortality task force, both RCRC and our member counties. We are trying to gear up to continue those discussions through the newly formed Forest Management Task Force. Those conversations have unfortunately not been as productive as we would like. We hope to make them more productive so we can hopefully tackle some of these issues without having to constantly go back to legislation. But we appreciate the support of your 2 committees, and hopefully we can continue to work through some of these issues so that my board's constituents can improve their coverage, rebuild their homes, and those that are still living out in high fire risk areas, which, as we know, is a greater area of the state every year, can continue to improve their coverage options.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ernie Falcon. I'm an insurance broker. I've been in the business almost 30 years. How you doing? I've heard questions, and I just wanted to give you my opinion and based on my experience. As an insurance agent, as a broker, I represent both sides. I represent the consumer, and I represent the company. So I always sit in the middle, and I don't like consumers ripping off the company as much as I don't like companies ripping off the consumer. And it's my job to do my best to fight for either of the parties, depending who I feel is doing the right thing. So the thing I want to say is, what changes can you guys do legislatively? One of the things I would consider for you guys to maybe consider maybe even writing down, because these are the things that where I think you can make a change, is number one, you heard a guy give a testimony today that it could cost an extra $100,000 with building code upgrades. Well, most insurance policies have a standard fallback of 10%. If you're insuring a house for $300,000 at 10%, that's $30,000. That comes way short. I think the standard drawback should maybe be 25, 30%. So we should consider having minimums when it comes to building code upgrades so we can cover that $100,000 and make it a standard part of a policy. It's going to cost very little. Second thing I would look at is I would look at policies when it comes to lending companies. Lending companies, a lot of times, he gave an example, a guy was paying $500,000 for a house, for a piece of property, but the house is worth $800,000. Yeah, that happens. And yes, it's difficult to explain to an insured that we don't insure what you bought the house for, we insure what it costs to rebuild the house. But a lot of times the opposite is true. You could spend $800,000 for a piece of property and the house $250,000. Now try explaining that to the lender who wants us to cover the loan. So it works both ways. So when you look at the industry, look at the lending industry as well, because they have a lot to do with how people are insured. Another thing, they provide reports today when you buy a piece of property. I think it's required by law. If you buy a piece of property today, a home, that if you're in a floodplain, it has to be disclosed. There are disclosures, and I'm not talking about insurance disclosures. I know you, Ken Cooley, right? But see, why can't these people who report these anomalies based on where your home is say, hey, you're buying a home in a fire hazard zone, so that people who are buying these houses can't say later, hey, I was underinsured, because you knew that that's what you were getting. You knew you were getting a house in the floodplain. So I think that should be a requirement, because as far as mapping is concerned, 3 years ago, I started noticing that all the carriers that I used to use that would cover people that were in fire areas started backing up. They were bragging about how, hey, you can come to us because we insure protection class 10. Protection class is what we used to use in order to determine what the risk factors were for the homes. So when someone was in an 8, 9, or 10, you knew that you had to go to a specialty company or a company that took on those risks. Those same companies today, they won't touch those properties. And the protection class can still be a 10, but what's going on behind the scenes is what's called mapping. So the thing about maps and who is in a fire protection class, I can tell you right now, insurance companies, they know that. Because the second I put an address into the computer, it's going to tell me if that person can get if that person qualifies to get insurance with that carrier. Not because the fire department, because protection classes were based on your fire department. If they're full-time, if they could be there within 3 minutes, if you're within 5 miles away, if you got a hydrant within 1,000 minutes, you could get a decent rate. But now it doesn't really matter anymore, because somebody who draw up a map and says, you got too many trees around you. California is about trees and the look. But California trees, I understand, are designed to burn every few years. We're a state that basically burns itself every few years. So it's just where we live. So why can't we make those maps available so that these guys that do these reports can say you're in a flood zone or you're in a fire hazard zone, so people have that knowledge up front so they can't, or no one can say later, I didn't know.
Okay.
So building codes should be higher as far as the standard. The other thing is people talk about rates. A lot of times somebody will come to me, right, and they'll say, I got a guy who's buying a house, and his income is right there. He can only afford to spend $623 for homeowners insurance. Otherwise, he can't get a house. And then I always feel terrible, because I got to say, hey, you know, to get him where he needs to be, it's going to be $800. And if I start shaving and taking off things that basically now he doesn't have replacement costs on his personal contents and things like that, I have to talk to these guys and say, hey, you need to sign something that says you know you do not have this, right? I mean, so if people are not willing to be covered properly, then maybe it should be a requirement that we should have signatures so they can't come back later.
Okay.
You know, because
Ernie,
a lot of people do it for that reason, because
Ernie,
they
we
want the
have
house. Yes.
more testimony to hear. So anything else you want to sum up?
Say again?
Yeah, anything else? You've made wonderful suggestions. I think we've taken them all down.
Okay. No, I think those were the things I was
Thank you
feeling.
for coming and participating, and I think you've made some very good suggestions, so thank
You're
you
welcome.
very much. Okay, next witness.
Hi, my name is Bob Leames, and my wife and I built our home about 35 years ago, and on the time of the fire, we don't owe anybody a penny. Now we are very underinsured. I'll tell you why. We have neighbors that we talk on a weekly basis, on a bi-monthly basis, and 97% of us are all underinsured. Also, like every aspect of the three gentlemen here, Mr. Larson, Mr. Woody, and Mr. Rogers, have talked to us about it. We had 7 adjusters for our cars because I have collectible cars. And then I have another adjuster for our other cars that we drive. Then we have 3 adjusters for our home, and then 1 for contents. But anyway, we are so underinsured. Our home, when we lost it, was around $2.5 million. We just barely get half of that from our insurance company. There's a lot of pushback with the insurance company. We happen to have State Farm. One of the pushbacks is code enforcements. After the fire of Oakland, my wife was keen enough to have 50% off the code enforcement, and we haven't even seen a penny of that yet. One of our neighbors accepted a bid, and this is just hearsay, for $1,500 a square foot. So my wife and I were really upset. We went to John Tudor, the assessor's office in this county, and we explained that we are not able to afford $1,500 a square foot. And the office said, we've heard $2,000 a square foot. So anyway, I'm here, really not to be aggressive about this, just a subtle complaint. It's been a year nightmare for us. I hardly have enough sleep at night. I can't. I'm depressed. If I do go to the medical advisors, they've told me get some anti-anxiety drugs, get some antidepressant drugs. That doesn't help me. Okay, so I just want to let you know, and also Senator Dodd, and also you people I knew you were a supervisor, now you're a senator and also state assembly. I want you to hear about us and Atlas speak.
Thank you, Bob. Sorry for your loss. And you do have 2 great advocates on your behalf. I can tell you that. Yes, sir.
My name is Stuart Funk. I too live on Atlas Peak Road, or used to. I have a new job, and I'm thinking about printing business cards for it. It's called Fire Victim. I reiterate and support what's been said before me by the public comments. They're pretty accurate. Our insurance companies, AAA, refused to give us more insurance. I have records of the fact that we attempted to buy insurance knowing, I've been in the real estate business for 35 years. We knew the construction costs here were far in excess of what AAA was allowing. So went to my agent every year. They said, well, you have an extended policy of 150%. I said, that's not going to cover it. I argued and argued. They say, we use a national, some kind of an average. They would never provide me with the formula. Long story short, I won't bore you, we were underinsured because of that factor. USAA, who we tried to switch insurance companies, red lines, our area. AAA used to redline it, as did other companies in the past, and I guarantee you this is a subject that you're going to revisit, is companies redlining these areas or making it impossible. If I go to rebuild, am I assured that I will be able to buy affordable insurance in the future? If I rebuild, and the average age on our mountain was 70 years old. Average male lives to 82 and a half, and I think I've aged 10, so I've got about 15 minutes left, I guess. But let's assume I rebuild, and at some point I need to sell this property. I live on a ridge top, and the new guy can't buy insurance. Now what do I do? I want to speak to one other thing, because I think I don't want to beat this to death, but on the loss of use, I got cut off because they've decided they've already paid too much. Though there's another couple of $100,000 sitting there, they're now saying you're running out of time. You haven't rebuilt, you haven't submitted plans. I have moved 6 times, and I'm going to have to move a 7th time, and there's nothing to rent. They said, well, go out and buy a house. And I said, I'm coming from 30 acres, 3,000 square feet, and a tract house is $1 million. And oh, by the way, there's bidding wars. This is not a good market for someone to have his house burned down, let alone 5,000 people. Another issue, and I'll leave it at this, is the replacement value. I get it. The insurance companies don't want fraud. But how it's misrepresented, and I'm going to use that term because I truly believe it is, the replacement cost is based on your honesty. And under penalty of perjury, you're going to say, I lost so many socks. I've been counting socks for 10 months. I haven't done anything else but make lists. We've got 50 pages of single-spaced stuff. Well, what they do when you turn it in is they depreciate it. Now, I have replacement cost. I got as much as I could buy. But they limited me based on a formula based on the cost per square foot. So I'm way underinsured there. After they depreciate it, they'll hand you a check for the depreciated value, even though I have a replacement cost. The only time that I can get true replacement costs is I have to go out and buy everything. Now we're talking about 30 acres of stuff. If I move into town, where am I going to put 15 cords of firewood in a community that bans fireplaces? Where am I going to put the things I inherited from 2 homes? Where am I going to buy some of that stuff to replace it? It was sold to us as a policy that, and almost everyone I've talked to, that's based on a kitchen fire, not a disaster. And you basically see people going out and buying tens of thousands of dollars worth of stuff, turning it in their insurance company, getting finally that replacement cost and taking it back to the store. My insurance adjuster, this is number 4, said, go on Craigslist and sell everything that you don't need, and you'll have a little more money left over. So that would be yet a second or third job or whatever it is. So something needs to be done about how this replacement cost is paid out. I was assured I lost something, I would be paid similar to a car. You lose a Chevrolet, you can buy a Ford, a Chevy, or go on vacation. That's the way it was sold. That's not reality.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for coming in and sharing your story with us today.
Thank you.
We've heard some great testimony, and I very much appreciate hearing from the consumers that are here. My name is Joel Loucher. I'm the Chief Deputy for the California Department of Insurance. I work for Commissioner Dave Jones, and I want to thank the committees for being here and listening to everyone. I very much appreciate that. I want to give a special thank you to Assemblymember Aguilar-Carey and Senator Dodd and Senator Lara, who have some bills that have made it into law that will help people in the future. I very much appreciate that. There were a nicely written paper summarizing the issues here and listing other bills that made it into law. We appreciate those. Many of them, of course, didn't make it in the original form that they started, and we certainly wish something closer to the original had happened. I'll say a thank you to Senator McGuire, who had a bill that didn't make it that also would have been of great help to his constituents. I really appreciate Senator Dodd, who obviously is continuing this fight for his constituents and for all Californians, and that's who we really all represent here. You know, we're not here to just think about our constituents or the ones who are in immediate need, but realize we're in a fire-prone state, and we all may need these protections as we move forward. The panels were terrific and laid out great facts for us. I just really want to add another special thank you to Amy Bach and United Policyholders, who are out in these communities consistently, not just right before, right after, but on, and really help that effort. My main purpose in being here today, and I'm here with a couple of my colleagues, was if anyone here wanted to talk to the insurance department after this, and I know you might have to go home or whatever for consumers or those who've had a claim, that you will come and ask us your questions. But you can also go to insurance.ca.gov, and you can find a way to file your complaint, submit your paperwork. We are there for all Californians. We are trying to help. We're helping hundreds of claimants now. So you can reach out, and it is a free service to Californians. I hope more people would take advantage of it. I think one of the takeaways we're hearing here in terms of an issue is that the coverage A limit, the limit on the dwelling, and this will be my last comment, I appreciate the time. Coverage A, where all the other coverages flow from that limit in terms of percentage of coverage A, that should not be a place where insurers are competing for business by coming up with different amounts for rebuilding, which should be based on the most accurate available information to get that coverage right. And we'd probably have way fewer consumers with issues, and we'd have a more fair competitive marketplace as well. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you to your Department of Insurance for all the work that you do to help consumers, especially during these difficult times. So with that, we have additional witness. Yes, sir.
Yeah, mine's not too long. My name's Charlie Kalu. I'm a Napa resident, and yeah, we were affected by the fire, but my big peeve was, I'm not even sure if anything has been done about this, but I'm more focused on mitigation. Is anything that's been done in terms of, say, aerial viewing of the county and the cities in terms of avoiding future fires, such as early detection and stuff like that? Because the reason I bring this up is I'm involved with a few aviation companies that have really economically sound suggestions and proposals. So I'm just hoping that when that comes up with your legislation and the power that you have, you could be able to be a little more lenient when it comes to a company that's trying to prevent future fires.
Okay.
Excuse me? Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you for coming and sharing the work that you're doing there. All right, with that, I'm going to close the public hearing. I want to thank the members of the committee, the witnesses, as well as the members of the public who came to share their story. I know many of you have very busy lives, and your presence here today is very important. You've raised many critical issues, and I know it has given all of us a lot to think about. And although we have heard many wildfire bills this year, I think we still have work to do. There's a lot of underlying issues that have been raised today about the difficult claim process and the lack of adequate coverage, and I know it has all of our attentions. Whatever options that we decide to pursue will need the participation of experts and cooperation among all the stakeholders. So I look forward to looking at the questions that have been raised today, working with my colleagues on the Senate and the Assembly side. I want to particularly thank Chairman Daley and the staff of the Assembly Insurance Committee and the Senate Insurance Committee that prepared all the materials and the witnesses that we had today. If you'd like the background information that was provided to all of us at this hearing and you're listening, you can go to the Senate Insurance page in the Senate, and that document is available for your review, and it has wonderful background about the whole scope of this problem. So with that, members, thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to be here. It was a robust hearing, and I appreciate your participation. We're richer for it, and we have a lot of work to do in the year ahead. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.